Item number 10, resolution adopting an alternative suppression plan in support of a variance request under CDPHE Public Health Order 20-28 for a limited reopening of in-person dining at restaurants. Director Whelan, Department of Health, and Keith Simpson, Environmental Health Manager. Okay, before Ms. Whelan gets going, I am going to take public comment on this, but I do ask, number one, pay attention to what's being said. The resolution that we have is a red line version of the resolution. That means that we've had changes since last night, since folks were able to see this as it was agendized, so it's going to look a little bit different. So pay attention. You know, perhaps your issue is going to be addressed if you have one. But we will take public comment, and I expect that public comment to be respectful. Ms. Whelan.
Good morning again, Commissioners. Susan Whelan, Public Health Director for El Paso County. Last week, my team came before you to present a COVID pandemic update, and I committed to you that we would accelerate bringing variance requests to you, but with a gradual and measured approach as we work with our economic development and chamber and other multi-sector partners. Good news today, we will be presenting a variance request to you, which is a product of the work of the local Pikes Peak chapter of the Restaurant Association, as well as the Economic Development Chamber's Recovery Council, which we are part of, and also including the hospitals. I have a tremendous amount of respect and compassion for those who represent the restaurant industry, and I appreciate their creativity and innovation as we continue to work towards community recovery. We all miss dining out at restaurants, and we also appreciate the curbside pickup and the delivery options as well. As you know, El Paso County is one of the most populous counties in Colorado, and we have achieved, at this point in time, one of the lowest infection rates along the Front Range. A big thanks to all of our citizens and community partners. That includes you, Commissioners, Commissioner Gonzalez, Commissioner Waller, Commissioner Stan Vanderwerf, Commissioner Cammie Bremer, and also Holly Williams, as well as our city partners, the City of Colorado Springs and Mayor John Suthers. It was mentioned earlier today, the Office of Emergency Management. We have been launching a best practice, full-on 24/7 response to COVID since early this year, and we've been monitoring since February. And we are successful in El Paso County. If you take what's going on in the rest of Colorado and the comparison as it relates to rates, our prevention measures have worked. And that's in large part to your leadership, my team who has been working 24/7, the experts that they are. We've got numerous community partnerships that have been working day and night as well. Pikes Peak United Way, we have call centers, Because I Love You, the faith-based community. We are successful because we are all in it together, not because it's one agency's responsibility. It's a responsibility of every single person in our county. So I want to make sure that we acknowledge who got us here, and it's all of us. So I want to say a big thanks to everyone in the community, because it is something to be very proud of. So we're at this place where we will request a variance to the governor to loosen restrictions, and we will do this in a responsible way, protecting the health and safety of the over 700,000 population in El Paso County. Today, we will have our attorney, our public health attorney, with the county's office, Lori Siegel, present some of the components of the variance. As you mentioned, that we were working even last night on some of the different changes. This has been a very fast-tracked process to put this variance together, the components, and working with our hospitals and partners. So today you will see some of the red line and some of the edits and proposals that will be recommended. Then with that process, it will still go back to the hospitals for approval and then up to the state for the governor's review and approval. We did take Mesa counties and the other variance requests into consideration and try to mirror what we could, but we also need to acknowledge that we have one of the most populous counties, and when we're talking about Mesa or Eagle County, it's not apples to apples as it relates to the volume of how many restaurants that we do have. We also have a representative from the Colorado Colorado Restaurant Association, Greg Howard, and I would encourage that to ask him questions, and after our presentation, give him an opportunity to speak, because he represents the industry. We represent public health, and we all have various different expertise, but I would encourage us to listen to the restaurant industry, because he has the experience and the connections, and I think it's important to hear him out as well. So with that, let's get started with Lori Seago, and I'll be happy to answer any questions later. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Seago.
Good morning, Commissioners. Lori Seago, Senior Assistant County Attorney. We were able, once we had this item placed on your agenda, because we had a good proposed final draft, we were able to also submit that to the hospitals for their concurrent review. Fortunately, they were very attentive and took this up immediately and got back to us with some suggested changes based on their medical expertise. So that's what I'm going to present to you today. I will be followed by our actual subject matter experts, including Keith Simpson, the Environmental Health Manager, to go through the contents of the plan. I'm just going to go over the proposed red lines with you right now. The first red line I'm going to put up for you is to your own approval resolution for your consideration. And what I'm proposing, if you're in agreement, because we will have to, we still have not received those actual letters of approval from the hospital, we're asking for their final review. And so what this added language to your resolution states is that your approval also covers any additional amendments that the hospitals might have, so that we don't have to bring it back to you, if you're comfortable with that. If you want us to bring it back, we certainly will. Any questions about that? All right, thank you.
Seeing none, continue.
Okay, I will move on to the proposed red lines to the actual alternative suppression plan itself. This document is one of the required components that must be submitted to CDPHE, and it consists of two parts. All of the red lines I'm going to present are to the first part, which are the operational requirements that will actually apply to restaurants should they be permitted to open. So the red lines include section 1A. That's redlined simply because it is moved up from a later place in that to highlight that regardless of how many people you have in your restaurant, all seating at different tables must be at least 6 feet away. In addition, the total maximum occupancy is 50 customers. If you meet one of the other metrics under B2 or B3, you have to use the lower numbers, but you will be capped at 50.
Can you tell me what the logic behind that number was? Is that just because of CDC guidelines?
I believe it stems from the reopening guidelines that have come directly from the White House, and those are the guidelines that the hospitals are using to review these types of requests.
Okay. Yeah, Commissioner Gonzalez.
But because it's not a change, I just want to highlight, but the sentence immediately after 1, 2, 3 does say that those restaurants could apply for a variance to that, directly to our public health, without having to go back to the state. Is that correct?
That's correct, Commissioner. So
there's some flexibility
again,
there.
as it says, if a restaurant feels that they can exceed those occupancy metrics using best practices, safe practices, they can apply directly to our local public health agency, who will review that plan with them and could approve that.
Thank you.
Under section 2B, there's a requirement added that if pagers are used in a reservation system, we want to make sure our restaurants are cleaning those between each use, because those are high-touch items that could potentially spread infection. Under 2C contains a requirement that each group that is seated at a restaurant must provide the name and phone number of one adult in the party, and that is to make it easier in the event of a possible infection for our epidemiologists to do their contact tracing, so that we can work to limit the spread of that disease as soon as possible. We're also asking restaurants voluntarily, they are not required to do this second part, but we are asking that they voluntarily keep records of table assignments. So this party was seated at this table from 7 to 8, then this party was seated at the table from 8:30 to 9, so that we know who sat next to who, And that just, again, eases the burden on that epidemiological investigation so that we know who was in closer contact with that positive case and can act appropriately.
So, real quick, one question there. Who maintains, somebody, I go to a restaurant, I provide my name and phone number. Who maintains that record? Is it the restaurant that maintains it? Does that end up getting transmitted to public health? Does it go to CDPHE?
It would be maintained by the restaurant, and I can certainly add some clarifying language in there if that would be helpful, but we would expect it to be maintained by the restaurant for that 21-day period in the event that a positive case is reported to us.
Okay, and no positive cases are reported, the restaurant destroys the record?
After 21 days? That's
Zero
correct.
government involvement at all?
Correct.
Okay.
Would it be helpful, Commissioner, for me to add some clarifying language, or do you feel like it's clear as written?
No, I think it should be, well,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's clear. I might have an issue with this. I thought this was one of the issues we brought back yesterday, but I'll defer to afterwards.
okay. Commissioner Vanderwerf, do you have?
Yes, thank you. First of all, I deeply appreciate the add of the words, and I think it's really a question about just making sure the words deliver the outcome that we're looking for. So I think I'm fine with those words, but because right after it where it says maintained for at least 21 days and made available, I'm assuming the voluntary component is about the maintenance for maintaining for 21 days, and the voluntary component also includes making available to El Paso County Public Health. Is that correct?
That is not the way I would interpret it, and I would defer to Ms. Whelan if that's how she reads it. But state law requires cooperation with epidemiological investigations. So if the restaurant chooses to maintain those records, and we have a positive case and need to do that contact tracing, then we would require the restaurant to provide those records to us so that we can contact the people that may have been exposed.
Okay, thank you.
So on page 2, paragraph D there, we wanted to add some language that clarified that any buffet-style service must be at least 6 feet from any dining tables, just as the tables are required to be 6 feet from one another. We did add language regarding masks. These requirements are contained in State Public Health Order 20-26, and they do apply to restaurants, but for ease of reference, we put them in this document as well so that restaurants can access it easily in terms of mask requirements. And then under paragraph 6, if there is an outbreak at a facility, so if 2 or more probable or confirmed cases are associated with a facility in a 14-day period, the facility will be required to close only for a period long enough to work with public health on determining risk and taking appropriate steps toward reopening, including disinfecting, sanitizing, etc. The only other change I had, Commissioner, and I apologize, the pages aren't numbered, but it's actually contained in Part 2 of our document, the disease response portion, and it's Section 3. I think this might be the 4th page of the document. This portion discusses our disease containment measures. There are actually 4 in that list, so I just changed the 3 to 4.
Okay.
And that is not on your document. It's something I recognize just sitting here.
Okay.
Any questions about any of the proposed red lines? Okay.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Keith Simpson. I'm the Environmental Health Division Director for El Paso County Public Health and Environment, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the background, some of the basis for some of the requirements and some of the line items in the actual proposed variance itself. So Lori kind of talked about the changes and some of the other matters related to it, but we'll talk through this document, not every single line, but we'll talk through the document in terms of some of the foundation basis and justification for some of the items that were in there. I think one of the things that Susan had mentioned, and we took to heart your direction early to expedite this, to make it of high importance. We fully understand that this particular sector in the community is of extreme importance. I mean, the numbers that I was told were in tens of thousands of employees, like 20,000 employees in this business sector, so it's obviously extremely significant. So that was of a great importance to us. One of the things is that we dove into this very quickly. We assembled a team of people that were different subject matter expertise to fill in the different components of this document. We researched the data supporting it. I know some of the presentations that you've received in the past, some of that same data was used for both local and national data was used for some of the components of this. And we also worked very hard on developing and enhancing some of the already strong partnerships that we had in place. We already had a very strong partnership with the Pikes Peak chapter of the Colorado Restaurant Association and some other food safety groups within the community. So we just dove in with those partners as well because we very much wanted their input and guidance and direction. I think the other thing that we used as a primary driver is we wanted everybody involved in the process to focus on what we can do, and not be focusing on what we can't. Let's go, here's what we have, what can we do? And the creativity and the innovation that came out of that was pretty impressive at times. There was a lot of good ideas that were brought up. There were suggestions, and so instead of this, well, if we can't do that, then what can we do here? How about this as an option? So those things kept coming to us, and so there were a number of things that are in here as a result of those partnerships and subject matter experts providing innovation in terms of how we can move forward. I think the other thing too, you all had kind of, it wasn't a direction, but it was, hey, we know there's places where this has been approved. Why don't you look at what's already been done and use that as a foundation? And that certainly is a big part of what we did. We did look, as Susan mentioned, at Eagle County and at Mesa County, and certainly took some key components from what they did to incorporate in, because we know those things had already been approved. So it would be a lot. We also wanted a document that we knew was going to have a strong chance of approval at the state level, because time is short. We didn't want to go through a process and have to start over again or make changes, so we wanted to be cognizant of that element as well as we move forward. And we also had a level of suggestion from the food safety folks at Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment had given us some suggestions on some things that might be of consideration in a variance, and we use those as part of our guidance as well as other state and federal information. Another reality of this is that we had to recognize the many different desires within the community and the business community as well. There's lots of different interests in this, and one of those is something that none of us control, which is the viral capacity in the community. That is one of the drivers of this. It's part of what the conditions are about, and it's certainly one of the key elements in some of the later parts of the document as well. Picture this in the context, you all have a pitcher in front of you and it can hold 4 cups of water, let's say. And we have all these different sectors in our community, each have a cup of water, but we can only hold 4 cups. So part of that is how do we maybe take a portion of certain ones, or which ones are we going to use to fill that viral capacity that we have in our community? Because that does exist, it is real. And so we had to be cognizant of moving forward, not only with this, but thinking about if we're going to do a variance here and change and open up our exposure risk within the community, then that impacts and lessens the ability for others to move forward. So we had to be cognizant about what we did here to leave us some room to evaluate and also leave us some room to move forward with other options as well. We also want to be very, very cautious. I've heard the phrase not picking winners and losers. We didn't want to do that either. I mean, the order itself kind of did that. I mean, that already existed. And certainly one of the things we did want to focus on is in in talking about the restaurant community, we already had drive-through, we already had carry-out, we already had delivery, and certain elements were already in place. So much of our focus was around the dining parts, which we did not have. So that was a focus in how we crafted some of these line items as well. And as I said before, we know this is a significant economic impactor. That was a major part of us moving forward. But we also balance that with the fact, and Susan kind of mentioned this, that this activity is a little bit of a higher risk in terms of exposure. We're talking about people being indoors in the same place for a long period of time. And so that's something that we did have to think about. And also there's been expressions from concern from the public about opening up too fast or too much or in certain ways. And also there was a legitimate concern expressed to us by the retail food sector as well as from the business and community leaders that we provide a level of consumer confidence whenever we open up. What are we doing? Are people going to feel safe? Are the staff within the facility going to feel safe about what they're doing too as well? So those are considerations that we all took into it. And because also the business leaders and owners and operators had concerns about liability, about what happens if we open up. Do we have some level of confidence that what we're doing is going to be safe and workable? And we, as I said before, we also wanted something that was approvable. We just didn't want to go somewhere that we thought there was a strong chance based on whatever we know from the governor's mindset as to what might or might not be approved. Now, if we look into the document, and I know that many of the questions were about this, but we know that, and this was definitely the number one thing from the community, the seating capacity, the capability to operate was probably the number one thing that they all were concerned about. And so that obviously was a starting point, and we began with the guidance from the previous documents that had already been approved, where 30% we knew was approvable, we knew we could at least go there. We didn't need to go less than that. Now, I will note that there are some other states that have already opened up and done some of this ahead of us. Texas, for example, Wyoming, they're both at 25% is the number that they're using. Now, they have some nuances on that, but any urban area or higher population area, that's the number that's being used. The other thing that we looked at, so that was a very important part. We did then work with the business community and with restaurateurs directly, and they said, well, could we do? There was a lot of numbers thrown out, but could we do this capacity or that capacity? And we said, well, right now this is one we're pretty comfortable with, that we know we can get through, and we know time is of the essence, and we're not the only decider. The commissioners decide, the hospitals are involved in this as well, and certainly the governor is the final decider. But a suggestion came out in one of these discussions was, okay, since we're talking about dining, what if we open it up to 50% on weekends? So yes, we're expanding the capacity, but only for a smaller percentage of time. So, and that was a number that seemed very acceptable, and everybody was on board with that, and talking in with medically and epidemiologically, that didn't seem to be a problem with all the other factors we had in it. And we also had, let's see, another big area for them was, I just want to also point out that we are not, as I said, we're targeting seated dining, and we're not doing anything to reduce or change or minimize anything related to things that are already happening with carry-out and delivery and drive-through. Those parts are not being impacted by anything we're doing in this document. Another thing that was looked at was the federal guidance. As was mentioned before by Susan, that number of 50 was the kind of in the federal guidance, and I know it's not state, it doesn't attach directly to what's being done in the state, but so we kicked around and said, well, what could we do more than that? And the number of 75 was thrown out and talked about, and that's what we agreed to. But as Lori indicated, after review by other partners in our process, they were more comfortable with staying with the 50%, or 50 as the maximum, which is the federal guideline. But to Vice Chair's question earlier, we had included, and it was retained after review by other partners, this component that we could, after a plan is submitted, further review by the health department. This is a local decision. If this is approved by the governor, it would be a local decision by El Paso County Public Health to review and potentially approve an additional variance request to allow for more seating. I think one of the key components to that, one of the conditions that is tied to that, is having compartmentalized seating areas. So some restaurants are just a wide open space, even though they they may have pony walls or some other dividers, but they're not really separated from each other. But some of them might have a back banquet room, or they might have a backdoor patio, something that's very separated. And we had no problem with saying, give us the right plan, use our public health principles, proper social distancing, and we wouldn't have a problem with that. Now, there is a topside number to that. We haven't gotten to that yet. I'll be honest with you, but we would probably not be approvable. That probably is something the state is going to ask, are you going to allow 600 people to gather? They would say no to that. So there is a topside to that. I just want that out there. But I think everybody was comfortable that we could have a limitation, but if someone submits a thoughtful and knowledgeable and plan that would work, we would evaluate that and move. If it's approvable, we will do it. The other thing was, the other question that was brought up was about the seating procedures. And there was the conditions in there, there's a lot of that has an epidemiological basis to it, as was pointed out before. And part of our charge to meet the requirements of the variance request is to have a solid foundation on how are you going to monitor this? How are you going to ensure that things are controlled? And frankly, that's in the best interest of everybody, including the operators. They don't want things to go backwards and affect them. We don't want to get started and have to go back. And a lot of public health practices go into that, and you heard the changes that were brought up in there. So there's an element where we want that to be documented. That's a voluntary thing, and we think it's in the best interest of that facility, because if they know and something happens, it can be judged more appropriately, and perhaps it will affect other businesses as well. Another section in there was about common use items. Please, sorry.
Yeah, Commissioner Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you very specifically said voluntarily. So that's what the question was earlier, was is that
Yes.
voluntary or is that a mandate? My concern is I would like that to be voluntary, because we do want everybody to help each other, but I'm concerned, because I do not believe this was included in the MESA plan. So I understand why we want to add some additional things, but I don't want to add something additional that may be beyond what we would like. And I get some of the recommendations. I just want to make sure, because you said voluntarily, I want to make sure that's clarified that this would then be voluntarily, and if that's accurate, I'd like maybe throw that in there.
Well, and I believe that was the verbiage, and I'd have to defer to Lori to explain that more exactly from a legal standpoint, but my understanding is that component would be voluntary, but it is in the best interest of the facility to do it, and as it said, there are other state laws that do require at that point, if something did happen.
And again, there are some state laws. I don't want us to do something that's beyond by the way. I just want to make sure it's clarified in whatever language we approve that it's voluntary, as you mentioned.
And again, I would defer to Lori to help you with that
Yeah,
process.
Ms. Sego, come on, back up here. So we're talking about 2C.
So the way, the plain language of the way this reads now is that every group that's seated at a restaurant has to provide a name and phone number. And that's going to be maintained by the restaurant and provided to public health if there's an outbreak or if there's a positive case associated with the facility. In addition to that, it is recommended that restaurants keep records of table assignments and seating and departure times. And should that be requested, if it's been maintained, then they would provide that to public health. If they have chosen not to maintain it because that portion is just a recommendation, then obviously they'd have nothing to provide to us.
Wait, I'm sorry, one more time for me.
Sure. So let's start with the first sentence. Each group that's seated has to provide the name and phone number of an adult. And that record, that's required, and so that will be provided to public health upon request if we determine that there's been a positive case associated with the facility. There is, as I said, state law, completely separate from this pandemic. State public health law requires cooperation with epidemiological investigations, whether it's this or tuberculosis or measles or something else. So that part would be required and not voluntary, the way this reads now. The second sentence in 2C would be voluntary. Records of table assignments and seating times should be voluntarily maintained and made available to El Paso County Public Health upon request.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Okay, so then we don't need the first sentence. If we're saying it's a mandate from the state, we don't need that first sentence, because I don't want to confuse people. And we can provide that to the restaurants if that's the state mandate. I think we're, maybe confusing people with that first sentence, especially if it's looking as if we're mandating something here locally that's different than the state. So that would be my initial comment.
Ms. Sego.
What the state does not mandate is the requirement that the restaurant keep a record of a name and phone number. So because restaurants typically, when they take reservations, as is set forth in 2A and B, my experience at least, is that when you make a reservation, they take your name and phone number. And because we're doing this on a reservation basis, whether it's by phone, electronically, or even walking up and asking for a reservation 15 minutes from now, they're going to take your name and phone number, I would expect. 2C makes that a requirement. Everybody that's seated has to provide a name and phone number. The restaurant has to provide
and clearly, not everybody, just one person in the
you're
party.
Correct. I'm sorry, you're correct. One adult in the party. So, and then that information is required to be provided to public health if they ask for it as part of contact tracing.
How long do the restaurants have to maintain that portion of the record?
I think the intent, and it's not clear the way this is written now, I think the intent was for it to be 21 days along with the seating records.
Yeah, and the other part that I get a little bit then nervous about is, okay, if that's sort of, we mash those two things together, it says that records of table assignments and seating and departure times should be voluntarily maintained for at least 21 days, which indicates to me that if they don't want to keep that, they can destroy it, 5 seconds after they get the information. And if it is our intent to treat the record of the name and phone number the same way, great, but if it's not, if we want them to specifically keep that for 21 days, I think that needs to be clarified.
And I would agree with you. The language of should and voluntarily was added at 8:45 this morning. So for consistency's sake, I believe that you're correct. We should clarify that the first piece of information is required to be maintained for 21 days, after which it can be or should be discarded. The additional information is recommended to be maintained, and if you maintain it, you would also maintain it for 21 days.
Commissioner Vanderwerf.
Yes, thank you. So again, I appreciate the voluntary part for the restaurant about maintaining records. With regard to the first sentence, I still remain concerned about that as well. I can offer an alternative set of words that maybe we can start to mull over, and that would be each group that is seated is highly encouraged to provide the name. It doesn't make it mandatory. It is highly encouraged. And I will make the point. As soon as we get somewhere with this variance and it's approved, I'm going to be calling my favorite restaurant, and I'm going to be making a reservation, and I'm going to be going to dine in because I want to support the restaurants and get the economy back up and running. I can also tell you...
Hey, hang on. No clapping during the meeting.
I can also tell you that if I am asked by the restaurant for my contact information, I will provide it. I am interested in supporting a process to make sure that we can get through a trace of an outbreak and protect the lives of other people. But that is my choice. I'm very uncomfortable with this being a mandate with that word must. I appreciate actually that there may be state requirements or state statutes that, to the effect about the restaurant owners or restaurant operators, needing to cooperate. But I'm just not aware of the nuances of what that cooperation entails. I do not know if those statutes also compel contact tracing or not. If it does compel contact tracing, I think Commissioner Gonzalez's point is well taken. We can remove that sentence from here altogether because it's already part of the state statute, and then for those that have an objection to that, that battle can then go to the state on the state statute. But if it doesn't mandate that, then I don't think we should be making it a must statement. I think we should be highly encouraging it. And again, I will reiterate, if I go to a restaurant, I will provide my name and phone number. So thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Sego, response to that? Can we do that? Is that?
So can we make the first sentence of 2C a recommendation? Yes, we can. I will defer to Ms. Whelan as to whether that would be acceptable to Public Health, who is one of the 3 approvers of this. And then, again, that proposed change would also be submitted to the hospitals to see if they agree with that as well. But yes, we could do that.
Ms. Whelan.
Hello again. I'd like to call Greg Howard up here with the Pikes Peak Restaurant Association, because I think that just to acknowledge that, what's already happening in restaurants for years as it relates to reservations. I will say that as best practice, when we're talking about contact tracing, the efficiency of that is to have the information that we need to move quickly and do what we need to do. I think that, when we're talking about best practice, voluntary, and in a way that we know that most people are going to comply. Throughout this whole, COVID response, the majority are working with us. So I think that's it. However, we need to change that sentence and to make it clearer that, I am in support of, but I would like to call Mr. Howard up here to provide some more information, because they're already doing a lot of the reservations and telephone numbers and those kinds of things, but I think it's the 21 days maybe that, or... Yeah,
and maybe, and I actually have a different set of proposed language if it's appropriate, and I think we're kind of looking at this the wrong way here. We're contemplating this from the view of the person coming into the restaurant right now. I don't think that's right, actually. I think we should be contemplating this from the view of the restaurant owner, the people that are working within the restaurant, the liability issues associated with those being in the restaurant, things of that nature. So I believe restaurant owners. We heard it from Mr. Simeon. I'm sorry I said your name incorrectly. But restaurants are concerned about liability, right? If somebody comes into their restaurant, they're not doing things correctly, and a bunch of people get COVID-19, well, they're worried about getting sued because they haven't done things right. And so our number one concern here is to allow these small business owners to operate their businesses the way they want to. If they don't want you coming in the restaurant without taking your temperature, it's up to them. If they want to limit things, it's up to them. So here's my idea here. I don't think it should be up to the person coming into the restaurant to get to decide whether or not they provide their name or phone number. It should be up to the restaurant to decide whether they are going to require somebody to leave their name or phone number. And I can guarantee in every circumstance, the restaurant's going to do that because they want to avoid liability issues. That's my guess, and I'm hoping to hear that from the Restaurant Association when they come up. That's my idea.
Thank you, Commissioner Waller, and I think you make a great point that, we've worked with the restaurant industry and numerous different leaders, in El Paso County and to get their input, and I think it's incredibly important to hear from them and their perspective. So with that, could I call up Mr. Howard?
Please. Yeah, real quick.
Yeah, just because I agree with that. I mean, the restaurants, we want to give them, but then again, that still makes it voluntarily, even though I think they will absolutely do it. But that's why maybe it's a statement, not a requirement. So something like best practices recommend taking the name and number of a patron at each table. That way, it's a statement of fact that's a best practice. The restaurant owners know that, but it doesn't mandate them. But that's just a comment.
Restaurant owners may collect this information if they want to, may require this information to be collected from patrons.
Thank you. Mr. Howard, if you'd like to come up, because I know that he has a lot that he would like to say about the process and has really good perspective as a representative of the restaurant industry.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for your time today and allowing me to come and speak on behalf of my industry.
Can you please, before you get going, can you state your name for the record?
Yes, my name is Greg Howard.
And you are?
First and foremost, I'm a restaurant owner and operator here in Colorado Springs, and also in the county. I've been in the restaurant industry for 33 years. I've been operating restaurants in Colorado Springs since '95, in Colorado since '93. I'm also the president of the local chapter of the Pikes Peak, Colorado Restaurant Association. I am also a nationally certified trainer in ServSafe, which teaches food safety and sanitation.
Perfect, thank you.
We take this very seriously.
Yes, thank you.
Also, I want to note that my organization, the Colorado Restaurant Association, has kind of knocked our borders down because of this pandemic, and we have stopped, well, I shouldn't say we stopped, but we've opened up our communication lines to any and every restaurant in the state of Colorado, whether they're members or not. Obviously, our organization is driven by membership dollars, but more so it is driven by the success of all restaurants in the state of Colorado. So we've done that so that we can get our information, this information, the information that I'm getting from and working with the El Paso County Health, so we can get that to everyone. It's not just, if you're not in our club, you don't get to you get to get the right information. So I thought that was pretty important as we move forward with this. If I may, I'll kind of address the issue that we're talking about right now, the 2C. I agree, Commissioner Weller, about it. Probably it's best off if it is the restaurant's responsibility to make that decision whether they're collecting that information or not. Heavily encouraged by the health department, obviously, and the hospitals. I think we were really pushing for that because we want the support of the hospitals. We obviously want the support of the health department. Because we would like to get back to what we do, and that's serving our community. We all take it very seriously, but I think the language protects us from the outliers of the people who want to talk about constitutional rights and things like that, which is all fine. I'm a firm believer in our Constitution, but I'm also a firm believer in moving forward, and I think that some of the outliers have kind of stepped on that a little bit and not quite allowed us to move forward in the direction we want to. So we're here to cooperate with the hospitals, with the state, with our local health department, and of course with all of you. So I agree with that. We've been taking reservations at most restaurants, I would say, take reservations, and there is some sort of a requirement of a name and a phone number. Whether those are accurate or not, that is up to the person leaving them. So this is America. We have the right to give a fake phone number if we want to, I would imagine. So
personal responsibility, right?
Exactly. And I think that moving forward, there's going to have to be a lot of personal responsibility to battle this crisis right now, this virus. So, and I support that. But as a business owner and operator and an industry leader, I know that we take this very seriously. The last thing we want to do is go backwards. Part of this process is also a stepping back process. On the 16th of March, sorry, it's emotional for me, but my industry across the world took a huge hit, and we want to make sure that we have some sort of a process so if and when this virus does start to gain some speed again come fall, which is probably more than likely to happen, that we don't have the March 16th day where our governor tells us that we're all shutting down. Maybe we go to a process like this and we drop down to 75%, and if it's still climbing, we drop down to 50%. But without processes like this, we had to make a decision that we made. We supported it. We closed our doors. We laid off, between myself, I own 2 restaurants, my wife owns a restaurant, I think we laid off 84 people. That was a rough day. I know that it was nothing we had done, but you still take personal responsibility for the people that work for you. We have a great love for our community, and we all want to move forward, and this is a great process here that we have.
So just to be clear, as the guy that is the voice for every small business owner that owns a restaurant in El Paso County, guy that's a voice for the folks in those businesses, you're in support of this this resolution and this plan to engage in reopening as we move forward.
I am in support of it, and it may not be perfect for all operations. I know it's not perfect for all of the operations I oversee, but if it is a step in the right direction to get some businesses with a little more footing, not everyone got the PPP money. And some of those businesses that did got it so early that they've been they haven't benefited from it financially in order to move forward in a healthy financial environment for them. So this is going to be a step where we can start figuring out how we're going to operate our restaurants. We've been very creative. I appreciate the compliments that were passed on earlier about how creative we've been in following the rules and trying to keep people employed and trying to keep our doors open and keep our landlords receiving rent. I have a great love for this community, and I can believe, it just always shocks you when you see the support that your community gives and the local restaurants some of them are doing well enough that because of the support of the community that they still have their doors open, and we're right here on the edge of making another step in that direction.
All right, and one more. On 2C here, we've talked a lot about that. So is the guy that is the small business owner, and also, again, the guy that represents all these other small business owners, I get you got, and you said it, you've got a lot of interests that you are concerned about, a lot of things that you think about. You think about your employees and their safety. You've said that. You think about the business aspects of this, and there's some concern for liability, and you've said that. But the thing that strikes me the most that you've said is, you live in this community, you're part of this community, and you want people in this community to be safe, happy, healthy, and you want them to be able to enjoy your restaurant in that sort of way. So if we were to change this language in 2C to say restaurants can voluntarily collect that information, and patrons must provide it if the restaurant voluntarily, or if the restaurant decides that they want to collect that, what's your thought that way on what restaurant owners will do in terms of collection?
I think restaurant owners, as a majority, a mass majority, will collect that information. Like I said, most restaurants right now already do collect that sort of information in a reservation system. I also think that in the language, we say it is strongly suggested or it is strongly encouraged by El Paso County Health and the hospitals. Mm-hmm. This language is in there to help them.
Right.
It doesn't. We're not using it for marketing down the road. We have plenty of social media aspects that we use for that. This is so that if there is a problem, we're not part of it. We're actually part of the solution.
Right. And if patrons don't want to provide that information,
that's okay too.
Yeah, go to another restaurant.
Yeah.
Go somewhere else. Okay. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Here, yes, Commissioner Vander Werf.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. So I appreciate your comments, and I can tell you I want restaurants opened too. There's so many challenges in some of the issues we have with coronavirus, and we need the restaurants to be open, even if there's a lot of requirements that's associated with it initially, so that companies can survive and people can get back to work. And as the chair of the Pikes Peak Workforce Center, I can tell you there's no stronger defender of getting people back to work than this person right here. And we're doing an enormous amount of work there. But at the same time, this particular point, using the word must versus is highly encouraged, is a national controversy. If you were to take a look at this, you would see an enormous amount of legal scholars involved, everybody having one measure of doubt or another about whether this is appropriate. And there are some counties that have already been engaged with litigation specifically for mandatory contact tracing in restaurants, specifically on that point right now. So I would like to also ask you a question. Would you find acceptable if a change to the words where we use is highly encouraged to instead of the word must on that sentence? Or if not that, would you accept the removal of the sentence in its entirety because we already know that the rest of the procedures in the document require reservations, and it's probably every single reservation system asks for a name and a phone number, and probably more than that too, like an email and other things. Therefore, that part of it becomes the decision point for the patron, whether to go to the restaurant or not, if they're comfortable or not comfortable with providing that information, in which case the data will already be there, and there isn't a requirement for this sentence because of the way the process works. So would you accept the change in words, or would you accept removing the sentence?
I'm going to have to refer to the health department on this, which they're here, so we can do that. But I do want to make a statement. If, as a restaurant operator, if 2C is going to stop me from moving forward in serving my community and my staff, and financially serving my government, I think we obviously need to look really hard at this. And maybe we need to look really hard at this as a nation if this is such a problem of us being able to do business based on, and I'm just going to call it 2C, right? Because that's kind of how ridiculous it is, that it's a number and a letter connected to a couple of words. We need to move forward, but we need to move forward in a healthy fashion. We're going to have the outliers who don't believe that these words matter, that they don't want to take this down. They're going to not take the names down whether we make it a requirement or not. We're going to tie up our health department and their staff going out and investigating things like this as opposed to doing their jobs. So I would love to refer to the health department or legal on how do we get past this 2C.
Thank you. Ms. Sego.
Thank you, Commissioners. I've drafted a proposed amendment to 2C that Public Health can support if you'd like to.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. I would even go one step further and say if the restaurant decides to collect that information, patrons must provide it or they're going to be turned away. Yeah.
Right to refuse service.
Sure.
That's already
All right.
Already given.
Well, I don't want, somebody coming back and saying, oh, geez, the county says you got to let me in. That's all, but I'm fine with it the way it is. Commissioner Gonzalez.
It looks fine to me. I could just say maybe add it as a best restaurant, because that's what it's based on, right? Best practice, not mandates or anything like that. But that would be my only other change, is start off with as best practice restaurants are. Voluntary. Yes.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you. In public health, I see a thumbs up over there. Excellent. Perfect. Thank you.
I'd also like to state, if I may, we have some restaurants in our community that have reached out to me and said, are you sure that we need to move forward? And they're concerned. And I appreciate that, of course. But also, none of this is mandatory as far as opening their doors. They can definitely stay closed. They can weather the storm a little longer. But I actually appreciated those people that were giving me that perspective. My position's been very difficult. I have a financial responsibility to myself, my family, my community, to make some money. But I can't put that, of course, in front of health and safety, which if we put that in front of health and safety, we're going to be right back where we started. And we don't want to go in that direction. So I can give you my word that our restaurant community in El Paso County and the Pikes Peak region is ready to do the right things in order to get ourselves back to where we need to be.
Amen. Very well said. Thank you.
And then in closing for me, I do want to make a comment that I sit on the state board for the Colorado Restaurant Association, and my constituents up there are shocked at the relationship that our chapter has with the El Paso County Health Department here, because most counties don't. Most cities don't. So it's a huge compliment to what they do here, because I made a comment to Tom Gonzalez years ago, said, why do restaurants feel like the Gestapo's rolling in when the health department pops in the door? And he and I worked real hard to try to break that down, and we've done great work, and they continue to. So it's a compliment to your health department. So thank you for the support that you give them, allow them to do their job properly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Who else do we have? All right. Yep, please.
Again, Keith Simpson with El Paso County Public Health. Just to finish up a few things, I know we've kind of covered a lot of the stuff that I was already going to talk about in the interest of everybody's time. One of the elements in here was about common use items, and just to really hit on that, most of that really just has to do with basic health and safety principles. Most of those things are in there, not having salt and pepper shakers on the table that everybody can use over and over and over. Now there's things that people could do, but to have to clean and disinfect them between each use is difficult. So basically the idea is the table is bare, people come, you provide what they need, take it away when they leave. That's a lot of what that's about. One of the things that we did add in here in the seating, I failed to mention, one of the other items that was not part of the recommendation from the State Health Department was the bar areas, was to keep those closed. And in working with industry and with business leaders, what we put in the document was to allow, that's a business decision, as long as they maintain public health practices and keep the right distancing. If their facility, it works for them and it's a benefit to them to operate their bar, as long as they maintain the public health practices, we're fine with that. So that's in there as well. The last thing that I wanted to talk about was just very briefly to talk on the last two sections, which is actually section 2, but there's 2 parts to it, which has to do with the county disease response. Much of that is tied into the discussion we just had that loops into that we had to provide to the State Health Department. How are we going to keep track of this? How are we going to monitor it? How are we going to respond if things happen? And there's a lot of epidemiological pieces to those sections in the document, but basically we're providing the infrastructure that we already have in place that's already being used in El Paso County through our instant command system, through our staffing and structure within environmental health and other parts of the communicable disease, our legal department as well within the health department. We're describing how those things are going to be maintained. What are we going to do? How are we going to keep those up? And we are also providing the metrics that we are going to use to define when things are headed in the wrong direction or things have crossed paths and have gone the wrong direction on that. So there's some elements of that discussion as well. And so there's lots of things that are going to be monitored throughout this process to keep in front. We will obviously stay in close communication with the restaurant community. If we see things happening, we're going to let them know in a generic way, so that maybe they might consider as a community saying, hey, maybe we ought to consider this or consider that. As the gentleman said before, nobody wants to go backwards. None of us want to get there. And part of the reason for the philosophy behind contact tracing is to contain it and to not let it keep spreading. And if we can't find where people are and where they've been, it makes it very difficult for us to contain it and to keep it from spreading to. We don't want to cross any tipping points and go backwards, is basically what that's for. I will leave it at that unless anybody has any additional questions of me. I know we stand ready to answer questions as a team later, but please, yes.
Commissioner Vanderwerf.
Yes, on an item not related to contact tracing.
Please.
I think there's with these variances and so forth, and it's just kind of a little bit of strategic thinking about trying to figure out how we go forward, because we're in this process of doing the initial variances to get industries opened, but then as time moves on, depending on what happens in the environment, we might be able to even further relax the requirements that are in these variances, and hopefully, hopefully in near term, but we'll have to wait and see, maybe come to almost all of them being relaxed. What are we thinking about how we do that? Because we have a variance for every industry, or we're going to end up with that, and that's a big burden to maintain those kinds of things. And then we're going to eventually we're going to get to a process where we're continuing to modify these. How do we do that efficiently? Because I think there's a lot of work involved in that kind of approach. And so I'm not so sure you may have an answer to that question specifically, but I'm hopeful that you're thinking about it, about some kind of a process or a plan on how to get there.
Can I slip you that 20 now for setting me up for answering that question? Well done. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yes, we as soon as this happened, and admittedly, this is the first one we've done. I mean, the graduation one was done, but that's really kind of an own separate animal, because because it was isolated things in isolated environments, a one-time thing. Most of everything else we're going to be talking about is going to be ongoing things. And so part of this process also included what are we going to do moving forward? We wanted to provide something that we knew has and could be and will be, we hope, approved. So then now we have a foundation and a template to move forward. These principles are approved. These philosophies are approved. There'll be industry specifics that we'll bring in as we continue to do our partnerships and work. We're also looking at working with the hospitals more closely in this process. We had such a short time frame, but we're working on having a team that will be specifically to that purpose of moving these forward. Now, again, I have to caution it in the context of we want to move it forward in an appropriate way so that we've got an ice-covered pond, and we're going to, right now, we're pretty confident we can take one or two across. If we try to move 5 or 6 people at once, the whole thing's going to break and we're going to fall in. So we want to avoid that, and we want to keep space for other opportunities moving forward, so we're going to monitor that. But we have provided some identified staffing to focus just on this task, and as we move forward, and obviously driven by things that the state has, they may help eliminate some of this, or they may provide further guidance that allows us to expedite other areas within our community. But we are working with business leaders. We'll be targeting specific industries and using their input and guidance. One of the things we're already doing is working with them to prioritize what their recommendations are, what needs to be done first. What's the next step? Exactly to your point. What are our next steps, and how we accomplish that? I will defer to Susan here to maybe expand on that, if that's okay.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. I appreciate that. I wanted to say, Commissioner Vanderwerf, to your point about strategic thinking and kind of looking over the horizon. We've been doing that when there was the stay-at-home order. So we just didn't start thinking about that at the Safer at Home. We have been connected with a large part of the role that we serve in public health. We accomplish our work through partnerships, as you heard through Mr. Howard and the Colorado Restaurant Association. So we have partnerships that stem years long. So we have been working for numerous weeks with the Economic Chamber and Development Council, and the council is the Recovery Council, and at some point maybe we can do a presentation with the President and CEO, Dirk Draper, as well as members of that council. So we have been in the COVID response, and we are also focusing now heavily on the recovery and making sure that we maintain the progress that we're putting forth. But to your question about, what is the logic, how are we going to look forward and be strategic about what we're doing. One of the reasons why we chose restaurants to go after a variance was because that's the with economic development, they had informed me that that's the #1 economic driver in El Paso County, as well as the #1 area where we suffered a lot of job loss. So that's not my expertise, so I rely on other experts that we partner with to provide that information as we move forward together. So we do have a strategy as it relates to different sectors and how we're going to approach that, while we're continuing to maintain the testing, the contact tracing, the disease monitoring, making sure that we have that trajectory, that downward trajectory. But I wanted to make you well aware that we're strategic thinking and planning. What does that future look like? And even in the fall, what's going to happen? Or even in 18 months now, when we have, if we have a vaccine, points of dispensing. So there's a lot that goes into this. And I know that Dirk Draper is here today with us, and he might want to say a few words. And I see also Doug Price from another community leader that we've been working with, if they would like to say something. But prior to even the proposal that we provided today, we were working with the schools on the graduation variance. I know that you have been heavily engaged and working with numerous different sectors, and you were working on the campgrounds variance. And unbeknownst to us, then something had happened related to an announcement, and that kind of changed it. And if we were prepared to come before the Board of County Commissioners today with that variance. But so I do want to assure you that we are strategic thinking and looking over the horizon what comes next.
All right. Commissioner Gonzalez?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I had gotten a question from a constituent, so regarding, because I even mentioned best practice. And so in the language here, it talks about, isolation, and then, a lot of these recommendations are based on best practices. So is that CDC, other public health officials? When we've been kind of citing that, what's the background on whose best practices?
It's a combination of things, but I would probably defer to Dr. Johnson, who's on the line, could answer that question more specifically if you'd like, but I know we use federal guidance, state guidance, and just local expertise and feedback from local experts as well. But if Dr. Johnson, if you'd like to defer to her, she could provide an answer to that.
Do you need that?
I mean, it can be very short. I just wanted to see, is this more national, state, or state CDP or CDC, or just kind of reference who that is.
Here we go. This is much of the guidance right here was this document. That's, if that helps you.
From the White House.
White House guidance. Okay, thank you.
Yep, thank you. All right, Mr. Price, Mr. Draper, either one of you have any input here?
Commissioners, good morning. I'm Dirk Draper, President and CEO of the Chamber and EDC in Colorado Springs. And I would start with echoing the words of Mr. Howard about the constructive relationship with public health. We've been meeting for the last 3 weeks, as I shared with you, I think last Tuesday of last week, about that and the collaborative cross-industry effort that we've got to share perspectives from business organizations and industries about opening businesses. On this issue specifically, the proposed variance for restaurants, we've met with public health staff members 3 times in the last 6 days to review this, most recently yesterday as part of our regular drumbeat of conversation with them. We did, for the association, we were supportive of the higher numbers of opening. Initially, we were talking about that 75 number, and I understand that. We were supportive of that, but I do understand the hospital's concern and the reasons in compliance with national CDC recommendations, the lower number that's in the draft version you saw today. I'd also say out of the council that we're working with, the higher weekend standard was a recommendation from that council, and we appreciate the public health department's willing to consider that as a test, if you will, of pushing that boundary and responding to the results of that. It's a nod towards the industry that public health showed, and we're appreciative of them doing so. And I'll close where I started. We appreciate a good working relationship with Ms. Whelan and her staff. Open lines of communication will continue to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anything for Mr. Draper from the Chamber and EDC? All right.
Good morning. I'm Doug Price, CEO of Visit Colorado Springs. I'm really encouraged this morning. Thank you for the seriousness in which you're taking this. I'm sure that our business owners, as well as our citizens, are watching this with the idea that it's going to be safe to go out, and it's soon. Because the question that we get asked is, when are you going to begin to invite people to come back to Olympic City, USA? Well, as soon as we can feed them outside of room service, and as soon as we can begin to have campgrounds and some attractions that they can go to, that allows us to pull this curtain back in a safe manner. And I can assure you that I also am the vice chair of the Colorado Tourism Board, and we are watching very carefully visitor sentiment on when they're going to be ready to get in their cars and begin to travel. So thank you for what you're doing today, and we hope that this will be part of a stepping stone process that's going to be safe for both our restaurants as well as our visitors and our residents. Any questions I can answer? Okay.
Nothing. All right.
Thank you.
Okay. Do we have anybody else that wants to speak as a part of the presentation? Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a brief recess for a comfort break, and then when we come back, I am going to open it up to public comment. We'll stand in recess. The meeting will come back to order. All right, before we get on to public comment, our district attorney's here, and he'd like to speak to enforcement issues.
Thank you very much, Dan May, District Attorney. That is one of the things I wanted to ask the board about, is what your expectation of how law enforcement is tied into this, and what's your expectation about how the District Attorney's Office may be tied into the enforcement of all these different rules that are being proposed today. Is there an expectation?
It's our expectation would be that the district attorney's office does what the district attorney's office always does, and follows the laws and operates in the way that you're mandated to operate. Same with the sheriff's office. Madam County Attorney, do you have something to say about that?
I do. I think earlier on when this process was going forward, I had announced the agreement that was reached between the law enforcement agencies in the Pikes Peak region, specifically El Paso County, and also the district attorney's office. We had several meetings where we have agreed on basically like a 4-step process that I previously outlined. That I don't know the exact meeting, I apologize. But when we outlined, that was a process that the district attorney's office had agreed to also. And that is the framework that we have been working under with the law enforcement.
That's one of the reasons this comes to mind, or I'm up here today. Diana May, the county attorney, has indicated to me that it was her expectation that we have a 4-step process where the Department of Health does the investigation. They first give a verbal warning, a written warning, a cease and desist, and the last resort would be if we look at criminal charges. And quite frankly, I think there's a lot of things in certain cases between cease and desist and criminal charges. We shared a series of emails back and forth where Diana May indicated that she felt if there was probable cause, I assume after the cease and desist, to believe that a crime had been committed, that it was her expectation that we would be bringing criminal charges. And she indicated that my statements to the Board of County Commissioners led the Board of County Commissioners to believe that same thing, that after we get past that 3rd step, that if there's probable cause, that I will be bringing criminal charges, or law enforcement will get involved, give a ticket and bring criminal charges in all these cases. That's not my expectation. But I don't know if that's what the Board of County Commissioners' expectation is. And I've got the emails if you'd like to see them. That concerns me if we're going to that step and based on a probable cause standard.
Commissioner Vanderwerf, you want to take that one on?
Sure.
Well, sure, and I'll get to you in just a sec, Mr. Vice Chair.
Well, in this particular case, if I understand correctly, that is not your expectation, and I think I would defer to your expectations. You're the district attorney.
Yeah, and Commissioner Gonzalez.
And if I could just say one thing, if we're happy to look at the position of the district attorney if the district attorney's office is changing their position from the prior agreement, because that was the agreement that was reached with his office, and we are always happy to sit down and have a dialogue if his position has changed.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's a collaborative process. I think we want to work with our community. We want to work with the businesses. It's a dialogue. As we've done, I think we've demonstrated we're trying to educate on what makes sense for practicing and following the guidance that has been coming, that it's been handed out. And absolutely, we don't want this to be a punitive thing. We want this something that educates and gets people to do what's right. And so, I mean, that falls under you and the sheriff. But clearly, we've been wanting to work with our community, work with the businesses, and this should not be punitive in any way. This should be collaborative and working for the best interests of all the residents.
Well, I'll tell you, not one of us has advocated for anybody being charged with a crime as a result of anything that's happened related to COVID. In fact, I think we've said nothing but citizens are doing a great job in this. But I tell you, our expectation for you as community members is what everybody's expectation for you, and that's to handle the criminal justice issues that are facing El Paso County. Now, probably not handling civil issues that are facing El Paso Paso County, not really your purview there. Your job is to handle criminal justice issues, Title 18 in the code, and maybe some other criminal provisions. And I don't think our expectation changes from that. We're, as community members, we expect you to do what you're charged with doing.
The other thing is, again, it was told to me that the Board of County Commissioners had an expectation that we would be doing this based on probable cause, and I'm not sure the board understands.
Who told you that? Where did that come from? Who told you that the Board of County Commissioners had an expectation to do, or had an expectation for you to do or not do something?
Diana May.
Oh, Ms. May?
And Mr. May, I think if you wish to try to misinterpret any of my words, maybe you want to provide to the board the actual emails. The email at all did not indicate that this was an agreement that your office agreed to with the Department of Public Health and all law enforcement agencies in this area. This was fueled by the public health asking for collaboration with law enforcement in your office, which your office participated in. And as you're aware from all the email correspondence, this specifically relates to the process that the Department of Health has requested. And as we've previously stated in meetings, from not just the Department of Health, but from a law enforcement perspective, the goal is not to criminally prosecute individuals. The goal throughout this has been to gain voluntary compliance, which thankfully, due to the hard work of the Department of Health, they have been able to gain voluntary compliance, sometimes in coordination with law enforcement. But I just want everyone to be clear, there has not been any criminal summonses issued. We've not had to go to the final step of the process that was agreed upon by all law enforcement in this district, including your office. If, again, there is something that you wish to change on the previously agreed upon process, we are happy on behalf of the Department of Health to sit down and have that dialogue with you if that's something that you want to readdress. Thank you.
Mr. May?
And I guess what I'm hearing your position is not necessarily what, I don't think I've ever committed to filing charges on probable cause. And I'm concerned that the board doesn't understand what probable cause is. It's a legal term that's used. Does the board know what probable cause is?
I think we understand what probable cause means.
Tell me what your expectation of
I think we understand what probable cause means. We're not mentioned in this email at all. Commissioner Gonzalez?
It says that.
Commissioner Gonzalez?
I would just concur. This was not, we did not state this. So the expectation, as has been repeatedly stated by me, is this falls under the purview of
My
DA.
expectation is the same as what you put out there, Commissioner Gonzalez.
Okay, right.
In terms of what you said earlier, and I think that's what I've communicated to the board.
Okay.
I don't think I've ever used the word probable cause. And I'm back to, do you know what probable cause is?
Yeah, again, our expectations that you're going to do your job. That's it. Holy mackerel.
Probable cause, quite frankly, under the law is a 50-50 proposition, if the board isn't aware of that. It's a probability. And so I'd be arresting people and doing charges on 50-50 possibility a crime was committed, 50-50 possibility this person's doing that. We've never acted on that in my office since I've been DA, and actually I've worked under every DA since 1982, I think, and we've never used that as a charging. So I'd be surprised if I was on the record telling this commission that we are going to be charging people based on probable cause. I want people to know that this is a last resort, and I think that was the expectation that both the Department of Health, myself, Dr. Kelly, when he's been here, I've agreed with all of his statements. We feel this is a voluntary compliance. We feel our citizens have done very well, and the absolute last resort would be ratcheting this up to a criminal level. Once you ratchet it up to a criminal level, quite frankly, you get like what you had down in Dallas, where now someone's given a ticket that's a crime, someone who feels like they're not complying in the courtroom, all of a sudden, boy, you're going to follow my orders, and the next thing you know, someone's going to jail for violating what can be very technical violations. You've gone through a number of violations today on the what restaurants will do. It is not my expectation law enforcement is going to be going in and giving tickets for every single item item in here that isn't being processed. Quite frankly, I can say in the restaurant industry, I think it's different than some of the others. I have told Ms. May that we will be looking at these on a case-by-case basis, that we will be looking as a last resort. We will be looking for every other possibility that we can get before we get to that, because once you ratchet it up to criminal, it's a whole new matter. And quite frankly, you're labeling someone as a criminal for the rest of their lives once we get to that point. And it can cause more dangerous situations than it can get us out of. In the restaurant area, I think there are other enforcement mechanisms. I will say there are certain things I don't necessarily agree with Governor Polis on. I think there's some things that he's handled extremely well in this crisis that we're in. He announced Monday that when he was looking at the case up in Castle Rock, he asked that law enforcement not be involved, that criminal tickets not be given. I talked to George Brockler, that is his jurisdiction up there. He agreed with that position, and I agree with that position. Restaurants are unique that a number of them have liquor license, and so you can go in and the government can control situations that are dangerous through the liquor license. Restaurants are unique that they get licensed also, and so the Department of Health can come in and take away their ability to do business. And that's exactly what happened in Castle Rock. I thought that was the exact appropriate way to handle that. And so generally in a restaurant, I don't see law enforcement or my office involved ever, unless there's some real extreme. I'm not going to say there's no extreme situation. I wouldn't say they're willfully trying to injure people, that it is now time for us to step in and we can do something that can't be done through other processes in the system. I think it's wrong to threaten that way, and I don't want people to feel threatened that we are going to criminally put people in jail for a year and a half. I've heard people say that. That is not our goal at all. Our goal, our community is being very responsible. We are seeing our numbers coming down because of that. I don't want people to live under a threat that I can go to jail for a year and a half because I shake somebody's hand or I give somebody a hug or I do some violation. There may be the extreme situation outside of the restaurant business, and we'll look at them case by case, but it is our intention, and I just want to say that we are not going to be doing it on probable cause. We will be doing it on that there is firm evidence. We are going to keep the independence to where others are not dictating to law enforcement when we should or shouldn't, but in the appropriate situation, we'll look at it. But I think it's going to be the extreme rare, and if there's a different expectation by this board, I'd sure like to know that because, again, we are all part of this community, and I think the restaurant business is too. I feel that in my conversations with Dr. Kelly, we've always been on the same page. He has very much indicated he wants everything to be done voluntarily. But if there are different expectations, I'm open to that. I see someone standing behind me, and maybe there is.
Yeah, Commissioner Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. DA, I believe we time for me. And I absolutely believe that never has any member of this board recommended raising to criminal levels. So I think we're actually agreeing with you. We want this to be educational, working with the community, making sure that it is not punitive in nature in helping out our community. So if there was a miscommunication, I just greatly I've never mentioned enforcement because that does not fall under the purview of the county commissioners. But when I have spoken on this issue, it's always been about being collaborative with our communities and our businesses, and never have I believe none of my fellow member commissioners have ever mentioned anything about raising this to some sort of criminal level. So I just want to put that on the record.
And I'd say from a clarification perspective, not only have none of us mentioned that, many of us have been on the record saying we don't think people should be criminally charged in this circumstance. So it's to be here for clarification today. I'm sorry that you haven't seen us mention that in previous meetings, as we've done numerous times before. I get that you're busy and don't get to watch all of our meetings, but certainly that's been outlined numerous times before. Commissioner Vanderwerf.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I also concur with my co-commissioners' sentiments. Appreciate that you came down here and asked for a clarification. I support the position that you're taking on this, and I know that Susan Whelan has a comment. We've had several discussions about, and you're going to obviously elaborate on this, one of the primary interests of El Paso County Public Health that I very much appreciate is an interest in education first, right? To work with anybody that engages in a violation and have a conversation with them. This speaks very much to Commissioner Gonzalez's point about collaborating and cooperating and working with our community so that we can do this in a friendly atmosphere, working together on it. That is most definitely the kind of approach I have an interest in, and I imagine you have some comments to that point.
I would just like to kind of back up a little bit from the start of the emergency response, and then offer a general theme of education all throughout this response. So part of this response is organizing the Pikes Peak Office of Emergency Management, which we are connected to all of our municipalities within that, and we have routine briefings, and they used to be daily, and now they're not daily. But we check in with our law enforcement partners, our municipalities, and various other leadership, school districts, all of them. And as part of this process, as it relates to the public health orders, that is something that is new to public health. We know public health, and we know how to educate, and we know how to explain the why behind what we're doing. And all throughout this emergency response, we have focused on education, not only the comments of the commissioners, but also of Dr. Kelly, our medical director. I mean, that has been the general theme, that personal responsibility, we focus on education, and as a last resort, that it would go to some type of enforcement. And Dan May, and I think it was the last meeting that we were at, you had asked me what is the status on complaints and cease and desist and those kinds of things. And we have only had one situation, and out of the over 1,000, where we had to have a conversation, and then after we had a conversation with a certain business, they scaled down, and then the public health order came out, and then they're open in a couple of days. But I want to say that the reason why we're successful is because of relationships and partnerships. So we focus on that, and you heard Mr. Howard and others talk about the relationship that they have with public health. I want to assure folks that as part of these conversations with Diana May and Lori Seago, it is always focused on education, and coming that from very different angles. There's online platforms for education, and there's also call centers with education, but we heavily focus on the why and the education, and overwhelmingly, people take personal responsibility serious, and they do the right thing. So I wanted to emphasize that there has been a process where we do check in with law enforcement. That's not my background. District Attorney's Office has had representatives as part of those check-in meetings to establish the process in which we were using. And I think as part of this emergency response, we always need to refine what we're doing. Every aspect, that's part of an emergency response, where we look at what we're doing, what we've done. As we learn, we refine our processes. And so I appreciate the conversation, but I also want you to know, as the public health director, first and foremost, everything we do is education.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's all I have. I just wanted to make sure we're on the same page. I think from day one, I've said I think this is an educational process, and actually I'm very proud to say that El Paso County and Teller County have not given out a single ticket yet. And I think that's something again, speaks to the voluntariness of our community. I will say the email I've sent you does cut out a couple paragraphs. I'm more than happy to share the entire emails with you. The other paragraphs dealt with a restaurant in El Paso County, and I didn't think it was appropriate to put up the discussions that were being had between our offices on a particular restaurant, but this was the general portion.
All right, we're going to open it up to public comment now. If you'd like to speak on this matter, please come down and state your name, and then you may begin.
Deborah Stout-Meininger, community advocate, citizen scientist. Thank you. I'm glad that you are progressing this way, rather than the attitude that most people have been dealing with, the frustration of being told it's all or nothing at all type of thing. So these steps will just really help the community. I do have a few questions, though. I wrote them down so that it won't take very long. But we do appreciate your hard work for this. Now, I admit too, for me, a lot of the rules we're following now are awkward and inconvenient, frustrating at times. but it's part of this particular pandemic scenario. And in my lifetime, this is the worst scenario that I've encountered, because in all my lifetime, I've lived in places where we had hurricanes and wildfires and earthquakes, but not to the degree of affecting the entire United States and the world as this is. And I do believe in the logical, common sense approach, informed diligence, and with dealing with this pandemic. So under those guidelines is what I'm presenting my questions for. Now, Teller County had a larger list. Some of those I can agree with, but that's more chaotic than I can even comprehend at the moment. But there are some things that they said why they were doing it, and I assume you all are doing too, because it's not just our economy, but we are seeing a higher rate of assaults and suicides, because people, their status quo of their life is falling apart in pieces. And to just be told, okay, here's this carrot on a stick, if you keep following it, someday, maybe next year, we might get you back online. That's not enough. We need more, and I thank you guys for working on that, and ladies. Now, one of the first questions I had was, I've worked in fast food restaurants as well as more dining intensive restaurants and places where it's a buffet. So those buffet type restaurants are probably not going to fall under this, because it's a whole different category that I don't see addressed in here. Also, there is the fast food restaurants, where I don't know if there has to be some different tweaks to this because of how the people get their food, because the drive-throughs work fine if you have a car, but there's a lot of homeless and walking community in El Paso County that don't have a car that they can go through the drive-through. And the fast food places, some of them let you go into them to get it or at the door, and if you've ordered ahead of time or get it delivered, but some people can't afford the deliveries. They live on fast food because it's cheaper and it's easier, but how do they deal with these rules? The 6-foot rule when they've got a lobby that's maybe 12 feet long. I'm sorry, I'll be quick with the other ones.
Pardon? Very quick.
Yes. Hopefully on your list it will eventually be the churches, because those are very, very important to me and a lot of the people I know. And eventually, hopefully, the libraries, and maybe movie theaters, because we do have that transient population that doesn't have a home to go to. And right now, don't know where they're hanging out, but it'll get tense as time goes by. Plus, we will have people coming in from outside the state soon, and that will produce a whole new roller coaster. And the 2 cases within a 14-day window, that one kind of concerns me, because when we do have the traffic from out of state coming through as tourists, that can really tilt our numbers in some weird directions on that. So those were my items of concern, and I thank you for your patience.
Thank you. Who's next, please?
Hello, I'm Debrianna Howell. I'm widowed, a grandmother, a mother. I'm a citizen of the Colorado Springs for 25 years and a native of Colorado. I appreciate your work. I have no idea all the stuff you guys must be going through, but I am just here to speak on behalf of my family and my friends and most of the community that I have spoken to, not only here but across the country. Obviously, you're here to represent us. Am I correct? We pay your check. Am I correct? Well, I don't understand how political officials that are nominated by us to represent we the people can tell us this wonderful man who owns a restaurant cannot work, but you guys still get your check and we pay you. Now, how do you keep getting your check if we're not working, and how do you get paid? I understand viruses, I understand illness. I'm a medical professional, retired. I've never seen a pandemic like this treated this way. Never in the hospital did we act like this. I don't know the numbers, but I've been listening to lots of doctors and experts in this area, and they said this is not the route to take. My biggest concern is being traced by the government. I do not like that. I think it's against our constitutional rights. I lovingly implore you and beg you, as representatives of me and my friends in the public, to have a voice on our behalf. That's what you're paid to do, and put people back to work. If the restaurant does not want to trace, then let that be their option. And let those of us who want to go out and support that restaurant do that. But if they want to trace, let that be their option. Let those people go and serve that restaurant. We need to put our people back to work. And you guys are working to do that. And I lovingly implore you to be reasonable and logical and hear the voice of we the people. This is not fair. If I cannot go to the church, but I can go to the pot store and the alcohol store, and I like to drink, and I've been drinking a little more because of this craziness, so where's the common sense, you guys? Let's get back to common sense. We have got to become rational again. I do not want any more government control telling me what to do and tracking me to go to a restaurant and take my number. That is none of their business, none of your business. It's my business. It really is. If I want it, I'm healthy. I'm 65. I have had no problems. I just, please, let's get back to logical sense. Represent we the people. Hear our voices. Let people open their restaurants, and if those people are afraid to go to that restaurant, don't go. Isn't that what the United States of America is about? Thank you so much. God bless you.
Yeah, I was just going to say to you, ma'am, I don't know if you were listening earlier, but that's exactly what we did in that whole discussion over 2C. It's not up to you. It's not up to me. It's up to the restaurant owner. The restaurant owner should be the one who gets to decide whether or not they ask for your number, and if they want to ask for it, they should be able to do that.
Okay, and people need to understand that. My daughter's a nurse in a PICU, intensive care for a nursery in Portland, and she goes, Mom, we can't even take care of the patients. There's so many regulations coming in. We are so confused, and we spray that, 2 hours, spray that. They've never had to do this before, and nothing's happening. They have no COVID cases there.
And that's why we agreed with you.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Next, please.
Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for hearing me. My name is Laurel Ann Flahive, Flahive. Good morning, Commissioner Bremer, too. Don't want to leave you out. I hope I can get through this in 3 minutes. I'm here to urge a no vote on this variance. When we restrict a free people, we have major issues, and this is still too restrictive. We have just redrafted more language today, and I would urge a no vote today and postpone it at least until next week when you have more time to get the language absolutely correct. I still think there's much to deal with the language. For instance, in the newly drafted language, it says that when the health department requests the information, it must be provided. However, for what purpose? How are we going to leave that open-ended? Like, I just want your information so I can request it? No, we have to have that. We have to have that closed-ended. Also, it must be a date certain. It can't be, until we're out of phase 1, which is this arbitrary thing that the governor is changing from day to day to day to day. It needs to have a date certain to end this. I would suggest 2 months out, because we have gone through a massive amount to get to the point we are today. And I appreciate very much your work. I appreciate very much you listening to the people and hearing our concerns. I would like to challenge a concept that was brought up today, that people who believe in the Constitution are outliers. I was very disappointed, extremely disappointed to see you agree with that comment today. The Constitution should not be considered an outlier. Also, there was also some comments that were made that I saw some head nods and some agreements from you on the chamber, where if you don't want to give your information, just lie. Just give a false name and a false contact. When did we get to the point where we call evil good? That is evil. Lying is evil. And I am ashamed that you guys would think that that was in some kind of way ever something that a government agency should endorse and condone. Shame on you.
Yeah, hang on a second. I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner Gonzalez.
Just specific to that, the comment was people might go to that level. So if there was a head nod, it's like, yeah, some people might do that. So I don't want somebody to construe any kind of facial tick as some sort of affirmation. And I do believe that's I don't think that's fair for you to do, to tell us what we're thinking based on a facial tick that may or may not be in context, and so I think that's very unfair.
The head nod's recognizing that people are going to do it. It's not condoning the action. All right, you got 35 seconds.
Recently there was a HARE Act that was pushed through the legislative session to protect a minority. And we in America are very emboldened to protect the minorities. And if someone is not wanting to give their name and their information in order to access a restaurant, that becomes a minority. Those become the outliers. And I think it's imperative that you protect the minority against discrimination. And we don't understand the full concept of the unintended consequences that can go forward from here. And so, like I said, I urge a no vote, today especially. This is way too restrictive, and we need to consider the language moving forward, absolutely.
All right, thank you. Who's next, please?
Hi, guys. Thank you very much for your hard work. I'm a constitutionalist.
Can you please state your name?
Martha
before-
Jensen.
Thank you, ma'am. And can you step
I'm a
just a little closer
restaurant
to the, there
I'm a
you go.
restaurant attender. Hippocrates said, let your food be your medicine. And many of us realize that, well, the major media is fear-mongering and putting out lies. And we are very upset about this. And we're also upset that there's so many laws that have been made. Lawyers have been taught not constitutional law, but on case study law. I was married to a lawyer, and I know that it's a very problematic thing. And we have so many masses of laws, federal, state, and now local. I just encourage you to say no to any of these things, because that would give liability issues to the restaurant owner the more rules and regulations you put out. This is a contract between the restaurant owner and people like me. I'm very healthy because I take care of eating healthfully, and I know that hydrochloroquinine, what is it? I can't think of it now. But anyway, as President Trump mentioned, that the quinine and zinc can help you get over it in 12 hours. You don't have to be panicking. Anyway, they talk about education, but who is supposed to educate the health department? Are we going to believe in Fauci? He's partners with Bill Gates, and they definitely have an agenda, the UN Agenda 2030, that wants to depopulate the world. Bill Gates's vaccinations have killed many people in Africa, and Fauci is good friends with him and has the same UN agenda. So I would say, if the Department of Health wants people to be overcoming this virus, they need to encourage healthy eating and healthy living, and not encourage vaccinations, which is what is the TRACE has been proposed. HR 6666 federal level. This tracing, even the major phone companies have agreed to trace people. We do not want to be traced. We do not want to be vaccinated. We, the people, say no to more laws, more regulations. We want our freedoms according to the Constitution. So we encourage you, me and millions of other people encourage you, because mothers are being arrested for taking their kids to the park in different states. We've heard many, many cases where there's been terrible overreach. And if you have laws, then the police and sheriffs have to enforce them. Do you want your children to be taken from your home? That's what TRACE is about. And we don't want our children, our elders, or ourselves being taken from our homes. And so we just encourage you, that's so precarious to put the word must in there. They could change it any minute. So thank you for listening.
Thank you.
For saying no.
Thank you. Blake, do we have somebody ready to go that wants to testify remotely? All right, thank you. And if we could, just kind of have somebody queued up and ready to go. I want to, kind of alternate. So why don't I take this gentleman first, and then as soon as you get, have this, the person, we've got her. All right, ma'am, this is, welcome to the Board of County Commissioners. Please state your name, and then you may begin your testimony, and you have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Jonna Blanchard, and I'm a resident of El Paso County in Colorado Springs since 2002. I was born in Soviet Union, and what I heard today sent chills through my spine. I saw American business owners pleading with their government to let them run their business. That is absolutely stunning. It was absolutely stunning to see that. It is absolutely uncalled for you to spend an hour and a half of your valuable time determining how business owners must operate their businesses. That was my first point. My second point is this disease has 99.5% survival rate. That is not a pandemic. That is a media hysteria. Right now, we do not have anybody hospitalized in the El Paso County at all. We haven't had deaths for almost 2 weeks. And what we're doing here is we're micromanaging how restaurants can run their business. It is terrifying. Finally, I would like to also note that, as the previous speaker said, when will this end? When you first shut us down, you said 2 weeks. Let's see what happens in 2 weeks. It's now been 9 weeks, and there's no end in sight. What metrics will you use to say we're done? Now we can go back to old normal. I do not want to hear new normal. Old normal. Because old normal was a prosperous country full of people who were happy, pursuing happiness, living under Constitution. In the last 9 weeks, all of that's been shredded. For what end? No end. Absolutely no end. Coronaviruses have been with us for over 40 years. We still have no vaccine. Do not move the goalpost yet again to put us into a vaccine, until vaccine. We have already 99.5% survival rate. It has just got to stop. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. All right, sir. If you could, please state your name, and then you may begin.
Good morning.
Hang on 1 sec. Blake, if you could just get the next person ready to go. All right, Ms. Libby, go ahead.
I am a coffee shop owner in town. My daughters are partners with me in that enterprise. And there's just a few points that I'd like to make that I suspect you have thought about and discussed, but I'd like to remind you of. For those of us we just opened this business a year ago last November. We had anticipated that we were going to be about a year or 15 months before we would get into the black, and that happened in February of this year. Since that time, month over month, we're down $35,000 a month, okay? I invested a significant amount of money in that business, and the problem that I am faced with is a problem of timing. The longer this goes on, the less likely I am to be willing to put more money chasing bad. Okay? So this is a problem not just of the rules and restrictions, not just of the question related to personal freedoms and the Constitution, but it's also a question related to time. And that's why I'm frustrated about the fact that Eagle County has a variance and we do not. You guys know the numbers. You know them as well as I do. I heard somebody earlier today suggest that Eagle County couldn't be compared. I disagree. I believe it can be compared. I believe it's actually quite a good comparison. And our infection rate is more than 6 times less than theirs. And our death rate is 50% less, and yet we don't have a variance. That's a real concern to me, because even with these changes that you're suggesting, which are going to be very difficult for us, we have a reasonable menu. It's not big, but it's not small. But nobody makes reservations to go to a coffee shop. I think I doubt that any one of you has ever made a reservation to go to a coffee shop, and our clientele will not do it either. So some of the processes that you pursued, and I understand the good faith that you have followed in looking at those processes, just don't work for some businesses. One of the things I'd point out is that nobody ever communicated with us. And I've communicated with other coffee shops who also feel like they've not been communicated with as well. So my concern is that this happened quickly. You know, we all know that we live in extraordinary times, and you folks are in an extraordinary situation. But that calls for extraordinary leadership. And extraordinary leadership is not defined by waiting for something to happen. It's defined by making something happen. So I would appreciate it if you guys would make it happen as soon as you can.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Libby. Hey, and sir, I'd suggest you talk to our friends at the Restaurant Association, see if they can help address some of your issues. All right, who would like to speak next? Okay, let's go with somebody on the phone, then we'll get to you, Mr. Pace.
Troy, are you there?
Yeah.
All right, sir. Please state your name, and then you may begin, and you have 3 minutes.
Okay. I'm Troy Hutchison. I'm a cybersecurity engineer in the county, and I have some very strong concerns about the data that's being collected by the restaurants. My concern is, how will the data be protected after it is collected? And will the data only be used on a limited basis for contact tracing? Is there a requirement for the data that is collected to be disposed of after 21 days? And I strongly encourage that the data that is being collected for this health purposes not be used for marketing or any other commercial purpose. What will be the process for the data, for the government to request the data from these commercial businesses? And will that data only be limited to the health department? So on that, restaurants are really, really desperate to get back to work, and they're willing to do whatever it takes. It kind of listening to the county attorney and the DA and you folks, it sounds kind of strong on tactics, that a little bit of extortionist, that, you know, it's voluntary, but we highly encourage you to follow this rule. And we don't want to get law enforcement involved, do we? You know, and you wonder why this county is frustrated and it has become so cynical of government at all levels. We've totally lost trust in our leaders. I'm asking you to help restore that trust and make it more cooperative. And, you know, we can work together, make this more of a, you know, nice to have, voluntary for the patrons. If you would like to be contacted in case there is an outbreak of somebody that visited the restaurant, please provide us the information, but just make it voluntary. That's all I have.
Thank you, sir. And I don't know if you were able to listen in earlier, but that's essentially what we've done. All right, Mr. Pace. Okay. Whoever would like to go next.
and a wife and a grandma. We didn't shut down to stop the spread or to save lives. We were told we were shutting down to not overwhelm hospitals and to not overwhelm equipment. We did that. Why are we still closed? So I appreciate you changing the wording and looking into that and not making it a mandatory thing, but I still have concerns. You know, when you go into a restaurant and they're busy and you give your information, is it going to be written correctly? Is it going to be misused? Is it going to be, you know, just transposed? Or could somebody say, oh, Joe Smith was sitting at table 3 today and he coughed. I'll probably call the health department. You know, how are we going to protect those things from happening? I have teenage daughters and they frequent local coffee shops, which I agree I go to coffee shops often. I've never given anyone my name. How are we going to enforce that? Are we going to ask minors to provide their names? You know, they go by themselves to the coffee shops. There's not going to be an adult present at all times. Is that even okay for minors to be giving out their information? And even if it's a suggestion, you know, kids are going to be more apt to say, well, okay, I guess I have to, and give out their personal information. That's not safe. It's prejudice against, you know, the line in there about having limiting to 10 people. I have 8 kids. 2 are married and 2 have 2 kids each. When all of us are together, there are 16 of us. I have friends who have 13 kids. I have friends who have 8 kids with spouses and grandkids. How are we supposed to limit our table to 10 people? It's prejudice against large families, and it stigmatizes us. Sorry, looking at my notes. Also, with regards to the, you know, nodding and saying that people, you know, it's okay to lie about your personal information. What's restricting us from lying is a good point. But more importantly, what are we teaching our kids when we say, well, if the restaurant asks, go ahead and just give them whatever information? We just need to open up. We need to be better about, you know, just using, like the lady said, common sense and just opening up and letting businesses do what businesses do. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anybody loaded and ready to go? Okay. Let's take the next remote person, please.
Hi, my name is Trish Doyle, and I own a business that houses many businesses in a large facility, including restaurants, coffee shop, brewery, and the bathrooms are public bathrooms for all the businesses. I'm just concerned about what protections will be put in place for all the businesses and their patrons once the restaurants reopen, and how can we be safe from transmission? Has that been considered? There was a reference made to opening up the restaurants that they don't want it to impact other industries, but I would see my industry being impacted if there are no protections put in place for the use of the public areas in this facility. And I don't know who to talk to about that or how that can be addressed.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. We'll get, maybe Brandon could talk to this lady offline and help her get her question addressed. Thank you. Okay,
Thank you.
In the audience, who's next?
Have the overhead, please, sir. Any society that will give up a little liberty to gain a little security will deserve neither and lose both. We don't need to be asking the governor. I think I've made this quite clear. You need to tell the governor what we're going to do. There's 700,000 of us. If he has a concern, why don't you have him come on down here and have a talk with us? I'm sure you'll find plenty of people in here. As I've said this before, you and I won't agree on everything. You and I won't agree on anything. And Mr. Waller and I will never agree on everything. But we can agree on one thing. The Constitution. We're just basically tossing that thing to the side. I mean, I just saw a document from our district attorney that says, what are we going to do about people breaking the rules? How about nothing? Don't put law enforcement in your way and make them act like security guards. That's not their job. If someone's getting a tar beat out of them or their stuff stolen from a store, by all means, let our good boys get down there.
situation. But now you're asking them to violate their oath because someone's violating a rule, not a constitutional thing. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm totally blowing smoke, right? But maybe I'm not. What are we now relegated to? That's a big time word, okay? Despotism is another word, and that's going on in this state right now. I actually had to look it up again because I'm not a scholar. But what are we doing? We're asking to do something that we have the right to do. We shouldn't be arresting anybody for anything except me shooting off my pie hole or getting in an argument with somebody, right? Day, right? I thought to myself, what have we done to society as a whole, America, and then here we are trying to defend our president who's trying to do the right thing, and then we come down to you and say, would you do this for us? Please, oh sir, please, give us a spot of pie. Really? Is that where we're at? I can get along with anybody that's willing to stand up to the governor. Anybody, including you. Okay, that means if me and you were to walk up Main Street right now and tell him to take a piss, I'm in. Any of yous, all of yous. But what are we doing? We're fighting amongst ourselves, and what's rule one? You start people fighting amongst themselves, and what happens? Who comes in and steps on us? Power, authority. Don't ask someone what you can do. What did Kennedy say? Ask not what the country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. I'm telling you what I'm willing to do. Dirt nap. Let's do it. Let's do it together. Let's not have the governor tell all these people in here who are starving, hungry, unemployed, scared. These people are scared.
Hello?
That's what it is. Hold on a second, ma'am. Call waiting. Anyway, so that's what I'm asking you to do today. Make that, don't make a rule that says, oh, we're going to allow certain things. I understand what you did today. You're going to say we don't have to do something. We shouldn't have to do anything except just live. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Does anybody here think I'm wrong? Please. All right, that's it for this part, and I'll be up for the next one. Thank you, gentlemen.
All right, we have another person online or remotely.
Yes.
Go ahead, ma'am.
Hello.
Please state your name and you may begin.
Hello, my name is Amy Utin, and I am a Colorado native who is speaking on behalf of other concerned citizens. What is the timeline for these new guidelines? Is this all temporary and will be removed eventually, or will this be permanent from here on out? There is no talk about how long restaurants will be required to abide by these regulations. Restaurants run on such a small margin as it is, and if they're not packed full, they won't stand to make a profit. What motivation would a restaurant have to open up if they can only operate at, say, 25% occupancy? They would still have all the same operating costs of utilities and staff, yet may not even break even compared to their operating costs. A maximum capacity of 50? That is not even a feasible application for all restaurants. There are large restaurants, small restaurants. You can't just say 50 across the board. And I would also like to point out that Florida's COVID numbers are continuing to decline despite businesses being open. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, ma'am. All right, the next person in the audience.
Good morning, gentlemen. My name is Natasha Sinkuski. I am respectfully here on behalf of God-fearing, freedom-loving Americans. People keep saying that they want this to be voluntary, and you say, we fixed Section 2C, it is voluntary. But I don't think that they're just talking about Section 2C. I think that they're talking about the whole thing. Businesses should be able to reopen with no further restrictions and should be able to make their own decisions about how they're going to run their businesses. We have the freedom of association. A restaurant has a right to deny me service, and I have a right to not patronize their business, depending on how they're running it. If a business is asking me for my name and phone number, I'm not going to go there. If a business is not asking for my name and phone number, then I'm going to give them my money. I would like to pose a question, and it was kind of skirted the answer there. Okay, if this resolution were to pass, would we, the people, be required to comply with this invasion of privacy? Or would we be able to choose to opt out in order to maintain our God-gifted, constitutionally protected rights? And will there be a consequence if we refuse to provide the requested information? And I have a statement that I do not give my consent to be contact traced, nor do I give my consent to have my information stored for such purposes. It should be left up to the businesses to decide how they will operate, and up to the American to decide who they will patronize. And finally, I would like to respectfully remind you of your own on-the-record words that you would never support such provisions. I pray that you will be the voice for freedom-loving Americans and vote a firm no on this resolution. Allow businesses to reopen with no additional restrictions, and allow business owners to make their own decisions as to how they will operate. It should not be the job of the government to micromanage America. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other folks calling in? Okay. Who else in the audience would like to speak on this agenda item? All right, I don't see anybody. Can you get the next person up, please? All right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to stand in a brief recess so get some folks up. We'll come back to order. All right. So Blake, do you have somebody ready to go? Okay.
Hello.
All right, sir. If you could state your name and then you may begin your testimony, and you have 3 minutes to speak.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, my name is Scott Solsma, owner-operator of Alchemy Restaurant. Wanted to talk and say real quick, one, thank you for your time, gentlemen. Two, I would like to possibly talk about some amendments to the proposals. Just in quick clarity, the position of one-time use of menus in restaurant, is that to include laminated menus? Doesn't say anything about laminated menus and if we're going to be able to wipe those down, or possibly if we could suggest using UVC lights to clarify, like the bar tops, laminated menus, that kind of thing. I also wanted to talk about the tables, if they are tented or if they are enclosed booth. Do we still have to have a 6-foot minimum to them between them if they are enclosed booth or if they are tented tables? And I was going to ask if in an open air environment with the maximum occupancy, say on a patio, is it still going to be 30% on a weekday? My last question, I guess, would be, in here it states previously approved through the licensing process for no new seating. In that, does that include, I'm assuming that is to mean like pop-up tables, that kind of thing, but the wording on it isn't quite clear, and does that mean you are not now granting any new licensing processes to go through for, say, like expansions? Or are you allowing expansions, you're just not allowing pop-up tables that weren't already previously licensed? I guess that would be just about the only questions that I would have for you.
Thank you for those questions, sir. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have you hold on the line and get your name and number, and then we're going to have one of the attorneys for public health give you a call to kind of work through your questions with you so you can get the most reliable and knowledgeable answers.
Okay.
Okay, do we have anybody else? Okay. All right, let's get our last one up here.
Dana Dugan.
All right, hey, if you could please state your name again, and then you may begin, and you have 3 minutes.
Okay, great. Hi, my name is Dana Dugan, and I believe I live in Stan Vanderwerf's district. My first question is for Director Wheeler, who I must say I think has done a really wonderful job and is sharp as a tack. Austria released a study which showed a 90% drop in infections after they made mask wearing mandatory. And given the fact that wearing a mask has become a political football, and that we have to pass tests to secure driver's license, adhere to codes to build, noise ordinances, 18 to vote, 21 to drink, it seems to me that this is being distorted and become quite serious. I mean, people are getting shot for being asked to wear a mask or their arms broken. But it seems like we should be driven by the science. It also happens to be the national guideline. So I'd like to hear Dr. Wheeler give her opinion publicly on the science of the issue, and if this policy is being opposed, by whom and on what grounds. And then the other question, Stan Vanderwerf and I had an exchange a while back on Nextdoor in which he was repeatedly comparing this to the flu, and I was curious. I saw a podcast where I think he disclosed that he was a chief scientist in doing pandemic modeling for the Air Force, maybe, or NORAD. I can't recall. But anyway, I'd love to hear if he still holds that opinion, and if so, do the health officials agree with this position? And then lastly, to everyone, regarding the issue of gathering name and phone number, it seems like a pointless exercise if you're going to make it optional. The point of the gathering of the data is to enable Dr. Wheeler or Director Wheeler's office to do rapid contact tracing and contain outbreaks. So I guess if there could be any response to either be serious about the reopening or just go for herd immunity and negate all the pain and suffering and economic devastation we've endured, and thereby in guaranteeing a worse outcome down the road. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. All right, is there anybody else? Okay, seeing none. Anybody else in the audience that would like to speak on an issue or speak on this issue? All right, so I will close the public testimony phase of our hearing, and I will bring it up to the board for deliberation and a vote. Who would like to kick us off? Well, actually, before I do that, any thing to add from public health or restaurant association, anything like that? Yeah, please come on down.
Again, appreciate all the time and the community's time today and on the phone. One of the things that we do request is that we set a date and not a vote and all of a sudden the restaurants are open. We don't have staff yet. We don't have these processes all put into place. We need to do training with our staff. We need to buy product. So we need some sort of a leeway to what that date would be. So if the vote happened today, went to the governor, he said yes, and tomorrow we tried to operate under these guidelines, we would struggle, which is not what we want to do. We want this to be as perfect as we can. So a 5 to 7 day leeway would be fantastic for us to be able to put all of our processes in place.
Like a kickoff date, not an end date.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm not sure we can really provide that in an appreciable way, but let's hear from Ms. Sego. Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioners. Just a proposal for your consideration. The way we envision this process working is that once we get the approval from the state, the local health department will actually issue a local public health order that incorporates the guidelines that have been approved. That way we've got an actual public health order that's enforceable and applicable. And so once we receive that approval, we'll reach out to the Restaurant Association so that we can incorporate into that public health order this is in effect 5 days from now, this is in effect 7 days from now, so that it goes into effect at an appropriate time to allow them to gear up.
Okay, Commissioner Vanderwerf.
Yes, thank you. My recommendation, well, first of all, to your question, I think an important question, but it seems to me that right, some restaurants may have the capacity to open pretty quickly. Maybe they have a really small staff, and it's simple. Maybe it's just their own family members, right? Other restaurants might be really big and have a large staff. So my recommendation is, instead of issuing a future date for this to be made effective, is that upon issuance it be made effective. But keep in mind, the restaurants, all that means to the restaurants is they're cleared to open, and then each restaurant needs to figure out how to do that effectively. So some can go faster and some can go slower, and it really needs to be left to them, because everybody's going to have a little bit of a different variance about doing that. So my recommendation is just issue it, then it's cleared. This is actually very similar to what we just did with camping. We just issued, you are open, and we ask you to comply with this stuff. And then the restaurant owners can figure it out. And to be fair to that, right, some restaurant owners might still choose to stay closed. They've decided that they're, just as an example, that their real cash flow comes in the summer, and they're going to wait a month. So I think my recommendation is we issue it, and then y'all are cleared, and you work on your own schedule. Thank you.
Did you have something there?
I was just going to.
Hang on, sir. I've got another question.
I was just going to concur with what Commissioner Vanderwerf said. If you put a date for the slowest person, there are businesses that could be ready to go. I don't want to hold up those, and I don't think anybody's going to hold it against the business if they said, oh, hey, we're going to open in 4 or 5 days or a week from now or that date. But I wouldn't want to hold up businesses who are maybe need to really open up that day, or they're out of business the next day for that kind of like all open necessarily on 1 day delay. So I concur with Commissioner Vanderwerf, but I appreciate the comment and feedback.
My thoughts are really about compliance, is making sure that that they understand the rules. I mean, we've had a lot of questions, right, of what these things mean. So I want to make sure that there is a time frame for these questions to get answered. I'm sure once it's released, my phone won't stop with the questions. But really, people should be calling their lawyer to go through these, because it's serious business, and we want to make sure we're in compliance. So I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
Thank you. And one more question for you, and it's based on some of the citizen comment that we've heard. Ms. Flahive has been kind of leading an effort to say vote against this variance, don't do it at all, or wait until you get it right. What would the impact of that be on restaurants if we continue in the circumstance that we're in? Because we didn't put the governor's order in place. We're trying to overcome the governor's order. So for us to hold off and wait, would that have a detrimental impact to all of the small business owners and restaurants across our community?
Absolutely. The financial impact would be tremendous. Again, the longer we go, we've all been given a little bit of a kind of a kick your rent down the road relief from our landlords that they're not evicting us, but we all still need to pay those bills. So the sooner we start bringing in revenue, the sooner we can start taking care of all of our vendors and our landlords being that, and our staff, of course. The unemployment is, most of my staff does not want to remain on unemployment. They want to get back to work, get back in the game, get back into serving our community. So
every extra day that this gets delayed has a detrimental impact to restaurant owners?
It does, yes.
Oh, thank you.
Chairman Waller, Commissioner Bremer.
Yes, Commissioner Bremer.
I concur with my colleagues on this, that putting a start date is not good enough. And we need to allow businesses to make their own decisions about when they're ready. And I think this is also where the personal responsibility discussion comes back in. Let's trust in them to make their own best judgments and comply, and also readily make available accessibility to getting those questions that they may have answered.
Thank you. Do you have any other comments? So if there's nothing else from Public Health Department or our attorneys or the Restaurant Association, I will bring it up here now for deliberation and a vote. Who wants to go first? Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, there was a couple comments in there. There was a lot of comments that were very, very good and useful. There are some issues with what we're voting on here. We're trying to fix it as best possible. We're at this position where the governor put mandates. We're trying to, get out of some of these restrictions as best possible. It's not as fast as everybody knows, as I would like, but I appreciate all the work to get us here, and we're able to get here because, Public Health Director has done an excellent job of making sure those numbers all came down. If you look at our dashboard, you can see the statistics. We are doing an excellent job in El Paso County and taking care of our residents. And so, again, I wish it was a little faster, but in terms of some very specifics, the gentleman with the cafe, I did think that was important because he did talk about the reservation system, and so I did take a look at whether that does affect them in 2C. And I know Ms. Segal can put up 2C, sorry, actually 2B. So that actually relates to his, walk-in reservations, because he said, well, nobody calls in at a cafe for reservations if they're going to sit and eat. And so there is a comment in there about walk-in reservations, but I do think it's maybe extra restrictive, and we can change it. And I had already spoken with Ms. Whelan, our Director for Public Health, and she thought it was appropriate to make this change. And because, again, this is overly restrictive now that we've made voluntary 2C. 2B was overly restrictive. So where it says walk-in reservations are also accepted if records of patrons and their contact information is kept. I think a very simple change there is walk-in reservations may also be accepted, period. And then it talks about how you would do that, pagers, phone calls. But then 2C still applies to that business, but it gets rid of this now more restrictive if they take their name and contact and information is kept. So that, again, makes that voluntary, gets rid of that, and 2C still applies. The revised voluntary 2C still applies to them, but I think that might give him a little more flexibility, so I did want to help out the cafe owner who made the comment there. And then also one person made a fair comment about a date certain about some of these restrictions. However, if we put a date certain, it may be taken as that the entire variance ends, and if Governor Polis has maintained a more restrictive policy, then our policy would end and go back to the more restrictive policy. So although it was a very good point about, well, maybe a date certain, that may actually put us back into a more strict guidance from the state or the governor. And I just want to say that I think that's part of the reason we also don't put a date ending this, because we could actually go into a more restrictive variance if we were to put an end date on this. But I appreciate the comment and the concern, and we would make sure that that doesn't happen, that this continues beyond once we come out of this.
Who'd like to go next? Commissioner Vanderwerf.
Yes, if I could just have a little bit of an engagement with Commissioner Gonzalez, make sure I understand his recommendation, and then I have my own comments. So with regard to 2B, if I understand correctly, that in the first sentence you're proposing after the word accepted to remove the rest of the sentence, is that correct?
Correct. With also changes that walk-in reservations may also be accepted or can be accepted, period, delete if records of patrons and their contact information is kept. Because again, that is restrictive and a mandatory statement versus get rid of it and it goes back to the 2C revised, now voluntary.
And if we could have the overhead, that would be up on the screen as well.
Thank you, that's excellent. There is a 2A, which says that facilities take reservations, and how do we address that with regard to the coffee shop case?
That's, I think, covered in B.
And that's why 2B, because 2B talks about walk-in. So a person could come in and walk in, and that person could then be addressed without having to give a mandatory contact where it says information is going to be kept. So that's the addressing, and that's why I was able to see that and saw that we still had left something more restrictive, and this opens that up, and that helps out the cafe owners who can take walk-in reservations.
Okay, great. I think I'm comfortable with accepting that recommendation, and I appreciate that. That was the first. I have a series of comments, and that's with regard to the first one about reservations. I believe that adequately addresses that. We know that this variance does not allow for additional placement of outdoor venues. It's only for the places that are currently approved for seating. And highly restaurants in our community that want to do everything they possibly can to comply with social distancing. And adding more space in an urban setting might be problematic, but for a lot of restaurants that are in rural settings, they might have really large amounts of land adjacent to their restaurant that could be used to help comply with these other requirements. So this is not something that that would prevent me from supporting this today, but I do think we should try to do our best to address that as quickly as possible, because again, restaurants need to have as much opportunity as possible to handle as many clients as possible. And I would maybe request Public Health to think, in working with our other partners, to think about how we could get restaurants to do more of that in outdoor settings. I don't know if that would be adding it to their license for venues or what have you. I think it is fair, some of the comments that we've heard, and of course we are trying very hard to get restaurants opened as quickly as possible. And so in this variance there is no treatment about how the personal information would be handled. In other words, where would it go and where would it not go? So obviously it talks about provision of that to Public Health, but it doesn't make any statement about it will never pass beyond Public Health. It doesn't say whether that ends up going to the state or to a federal level. That, I think, has some risks in it. And I'm not quite sure how to deal with that at the moment. Maybe Public Health might be willing to make a recommendation on that. And then as far as coming now to the contact tracing part, I've been looking at the existing words that we have in the proposal that was brought forward, and also the handwritten words that was provided by Lori Segal, and I appreciate very deeply the attempt to kind of rewrite this and make it a little bit less cumbersome. I actually like the new words, but I do believe there are two issues that we have here. One is the right of the restaurant itself to behave in a particular way, and then also the right of the individual to behave in a particular way. So I have a proposal here. Basically, it's a combination of the two. It is the 2C exactly as written by Lori Segal, with one additional sentence added at the bottom, which is actually a repeat of the first sentence in 2C in the other document, so that it would read, each group is highly encouraged to provide the name and phone number of one adult in the group or table. The idea being it's specifically stated that it's highly encouraged, but it's also obvious it is not a requirement. So that is what I would like to propose for 2C for that particular paragraph, to adopt what Lori Segal provided and to add that one sentence, because I think there's treatment in both what the restaurant should do and also what the individual has rights for.
Before we move on, can I address that?
Yes, please.
I have a little bit of a concern with that. What if the restaurant, the restaurant owner says, I want to avoid liability issues here, so I want to require somebody that comes into my restaurant to provide that information. And if they don't provide it, fine, go to the restaurant that doesn't require it. But my worry is if we put in there that we're highly encouraging something, then we're taking the ability out of the restaurant owner's hand to kind of handle their small business in the way that they see fit. That's my concern.
I don't think, I appreciate the comment, Commissioner Waller. I don't think it obviates the capacity of the restaurant to or give them the inability to do that. I think there's going to be a lot of different ways that this is going to play out. Based on the initial part that was written by Lori Segal, where the restaurants are encouraged, but that also means that they are not required, that the restaurant has the choice to not accept patrons that refuse. But we also have individual rights that I think need to be addressed in this, because this is an important component. So my sense of it, Commissioner, is it does not prevent the restaurant from taking one particular position or another. If the restaurant decides that they think it's in their own best interest to require that patrons provide that information, I do not believe this, the combination of these two sections prevents them from doing that in any way.
Okay, I appreciate your position there. Can we make it happen that way, Ms. Segal?
I'm concerned about it from a public health perspective, from a messaging perspective. I agree that when you put in a regulation that you're encouraged to do something, that's not enforceable. So my concern from a public health perspective would be that it would inadvertently insert public health into that patron establishment relationship, and that right to refuse service and right to not patronize an establishment. And I'm just trying to protect public health workload. If we put in that statement, we're going to have patrons that don't want to provide that information. We're going to have a restaurant that says, we're not going to offer you service. We're then going to get calls from a bunch of customers who have chosen not to provide that, saying, your order says I don't have to. I want you to enforce that against the restaurant. And then we're going to have to explain to these individuals, I want to be clear, not that they don't have a right to have their questions answered. I'm just trying to save us from receiving those calls and having to clarify those statements that we are not inserting ourselves into that process. I think the language as it's written now is clear that restaurants are encouraged but not required to obtain this information and to keep it. If they choose not to, fine. If they choose to and someone doesn't comply with that, it's the same no shirt, no shoes, no service type of scenario where then that relationship is between the restaurant and the individual, and public health is not getting involved in any disagreements that may arise.
Yeah, and that's exactly my concern. Better articulated than I did. Yeah, she said it better than I did, that's for sure.
Thank you. I appreciate that response. I'll take that under consideration and think about those comments. My sense of it is that those scenarios, the different various ways that this can play out in that relationship between the restaurant owner or operator and the patron, they'll play out whether that sentence is there or not.
And it may. We do get calls that say, I tried to go to this business and they wanted to require me to wear a mask, and then they told me I couldn't come in. Can you please tell them they have to let me come in? No, we can't. That's, as a private business, that's their prerogative. Even though you as an individual may not be required to wear a mask to enter into a retail store, they may choose to require it of you, and that's their prerogative.
Thank you. Those are the extent of my comments.
Thank you. Commissioner Bremer, do you have anything to add?
I do. I realized that I began this meeting with encouraging comments that had constructive suggestions that helped us move the ball forward to where our community wants to be. And I believe that that's what's happened with this variance in front of us. With the changes that have been proposed and made today, with the exception of that last one that was mentioned. I believe Ms. Sego's rewrite of Section 2C was spot on. And I believe that if we as a Board of County Commissioners want to encourage or promote a certain activity, we don't need to do it through ordinance or a public health order. We have other ways we can encourage people to do, to take personal responsibility and do what's best for them, their business, the community. I don't think we need to perhaps add more encouragement into something that we really do need people to follow. So for that reason, Commissioner Vanderwerf, I agree with Ms. Sego on the last comment, and I liked her first rewrite. But all of that to say, this is a perfect example of what happens when we get together. We discuss what's important to us, what's important to our constituents, our community, and look at the different perspectives that those are coming from, and try to come up with something that really does move the ball forward. I think that's what's happened with this variance. It's taken a tremendous amount of work by a lot of people. That being said, it's not a perfect solution, and I'm not willing for perfect to be the enemy of the good in this case. I think that our constituents, our business owners in this community want something, and they want something now, and they want they want to clearly be able to plan for their business going forward. And I think we should provide them with the ability to do that. And, you know, it's, we're not going to make everybody happy here. And I will point out that I have one concern, but I'm not going to push it or fight it, because to be honest with you, I realized that it was already a compromise to get to some of the numbers we're in on this. And I am not willing to hold up this going before the governor one more day. And by changing the piece that I would like to see changed, would definitely hold it up quite a bit. And but I will say that I think I do think we have to consider that you know, the 30% 4 days a week and 50% occupancy the other 3 days a week does not fully consider, you know, if these guidelines are put in place for physical requirements and physical capacity for a business to be in compliance of what we're asking them to, then their ability to comply in the same space on Thursday is no different than it is on Friday. So, but I also maintain that this is, you know, this is a compromise that that people are willing to go forward with right now. And I think that is perhaps more important than getting it just perfect. You know, I just want to be cognizant that that was kind of a little red flag in my mind, but I want to see the process move forward. So I will be voting for this today. I am very, very impressed with the changes we were able to put in place today that made it less restrictive and less onerous on our business owners. I will be voting for this today, and I just appreciate all the collaborative work that went into it. You know, we, on an earlier agenda item, we had Mr. Green from the city of Colorado Springs sitting in with us, and we talked about collaboration and why we as El Paso County chose to share that funding with all of the municipalities. This is the same thing. It's not perfect, and we have worked together to have something that is amenable to the people that want to see this community move forward. And I'm glad we could get to that point, and I think we will continue to push it, but we should go with this one now.
Yes, Commissioner Vanderwerf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in thinking upon the comments provided by our lawyer and my fellow commissioners, I am willing to forego my recommendation of the additional words and recommend that should we go forward with a motion that we consider adopting 2C, the rewritten words from Lori Seago, in its entirety. I do believe that the concept of a lot of different ways this will play out in that relationship between the restaurant owner or operator and the patron will play out in several different ways. There will be some citizens that will probably ask the restaurant owner, are you going to collect this or are you not? And based on that answer, we'll decide to not patronize that establishment or patronize that establishment. In fairness to that, that is not a perfect world, but it does allow particular individuals to protect what they consider to be important to themselves by simply choosing not to patronize a restaurant that doesn't meet their own interests. So that is a path forward. I will make one more point. This is a really difficult process. This is not easy to do, but it is so important that we get started on getting restaurants opened. It is so important that we do that. I definitely believe firmly in that. I have concerns about what's in here, but I am willing to go forward and also include the removal of my recommended words for 2C. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to kind of thank Commissioner Bremer for her comments and everybody's comments here. I apologize if I'm kind of repeating, but I agree with her. I mean, there were still other things. I caught the 30% versus the 50%. If you can do it on the weekend, I'm sure you can do it during the week. But we don't want to hold something down. I've been for 2 weeks trying to get this moving forward so we can try to save our businesses, try to save our restaurants, other businesses, churches. I've been pushing. Everybody knows I've been pushing very hard to have us move forward. And so there are other concerns I had, but I really do think we've addressed the biggest concerns: privacy rights. Getting rid of the mandatory part. That was something that we all highlighted yesterday when we read through this. And for us to get to the position where we've made the changes, where we're protecting people's privacy rights and getting these things open as soon as possible. That's why I'm willing to support this. Again, I had a couple other recommended changes, but I know that would possibly delay moving forward, and so I am for moving forward and opening them up as soon as possible, because I think we need to help our businesses, and if we can do that in other sectors, everybody knows I'm ready to move that smartly, so I do believe that getting this approved today makes sense. In combat, I think they say the 80% plan today is better than the 100% plan next week, when businesses could be failing based on that decision. So I'm willing to support this today.
I'm not willing to support this today. I'm excited to support this today.
I am excited. I think that you're right. I am excited because, as you've known, I've been pushing this pretty hard. I am very happy for this and that we're at this position. So thank you for that. I think this is something very good. I think it's something that our public and residents should be looking forward to. Because I'm pretty sure the governor will approve this, and I'm going to be optimistic. But you're right. This is actually a very good day moving forward, and I appreciate your comment there.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited to support this because I'm excited to get restaurants back to work. I'm also a little bit frustrated, though. Let me tell you why. We've had a group of citizens coming in saying, you're not doing enough, you're not moving fast enough, you're not doing what you should be doing to get restaurants open. And so we push as hard as we can, as fast as we can. Commissioner Gonzalez is right. We've been working on this for a few weeks now to try to get this thing moving along as absolutely expeditiously as possible. Some of our staff members came to me and said, hey, we got a draft. When do you want to put it on the calendar? And I said, as soon as possible. You know why? Because I want to get restaurants open as soon as possible. That's what I want to do. And the staff said, well, it's not quite ready yet. And I said, you know what? We will handle those things from the dais if we need to make a few changes, because we want to move forward as quick as we can. Then what happens today? We have the very same people show up that have been saying you're not moving quick enough, showed up today and said, nope, you need to slow down. You need to stop moving so quickly and not proceed in the way that we've been asking you to proceed all of this time. You got to kind of pick your poison here. Here's what we want. We want to get restaurants open. And if we vote no on this today, restaurants don't open. If we delay this, restaurants don't open. If we do something different than passing this today, restaurants don't open. Now, I get people's concerns. I get that they think that there shouldn't be any restrictions on the opening of restaurants moving forward. We can have that debate, but here's who you need to go talk to about that. The governor of the state of Colorado, his name's Jared Polis. Reach out to him. Send your concerns to him. If you believe that we should be opening everything up right now, he's your guy. You know what? You want to know why? Because he's the one that closed everything down. The county didn't close everything down. The state of Colorado did. And again, you can debate whether or not you think that was the right decision, but he's the guy you need to talk to. Here's what we could do. We could say nothing here and just allow restaurants to go do whatever they want, not up to our jurisdictional control. But I don't know if you've been following the story in Castle Rock of the restaurant that opened up there. They did that. The county commission didn't say anything about them opening up, had no comment on it, didn't engage in enforcement action. I don't think the sheriff's office went out to engage in any enforcement action. But I don't think the Castle Rock Police Department went out and engaged in any enforcement action. I don't think that the Department of Public Health that operates within Douglas County went out and engaged in any enforcement action. But guess what? That restaurant's paying for it now. You want to know why? Because their state level license got suspended. Who did it get suspended by? Nobody in Douglas County. It got suspended by the governor. of the state of Colorado. I don't want that happening here. I don't want our restaurants to have to suffer any sort of suspensions like that because they're forced into making a decision. So once again, I'm excited to be here today to vote yes on this to get our restaurants opened as soon as possible, because a no vote simply means it's going to delay that action even further. And we heard from the Restaurant Association, the person who represents the thousands of small business owners in our community, and he said every single day we delay is another devastating impact for our ability to keep our businesses open tomorrow. I'm not willing to push that, not willing to delay this to try to get to the 100% solution, because I know how negatively that impacts you and your ability to earn a living for your family, your ability to employ people who earn livings for their family, and your ability to do the things that you want to do to make our community a better place to live and work. I'm not willing to do that. I think passing this thing is absolutely the right thing to do, and I'm excited to do it today. Could I have a motion, please?
I move to approve item, what item is this? Item 10 with all the included amendments as stated by our attorney, Ms. Sego.
And I will second that.
Thank you. I'll call the roll. Commissioner Bremer.
Aye.
Commissioner Vanderwerf.
Before I give my vote, I just want to express my thanks to the citizens that have come here and expressed their points of view. This is exactly what we do in this country. Everybody gets an opportunity to speak, and I appreciate that the members of this board protect that, and I appreciate that the citizens came here. My vote is aye.
Mr. Vice Chair.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. That passes unanimously with, Commissioner Williams excused.